You don't work out, you work out for 15 minutes. Maybe it's not your best one, but you're happy you showed up.
Right.
So if you can get to that point where you're happy you showed up and you feel accomplished, that's going to drive motivation for the next workout.
But our standard deviation, right there in table 1, standard deviation for LDL cholesterol in our study was 84.7 milligrams per deciliter.
Jeez.
It's the largest spread. I can say this with full confidence. The largest spread of LDL cholesterol in any imaging study ever done.
The studies are only going to show us, averages and medians and things like that. But N equals 1 is where the rubber hits the road.
I think that a lot of science is suffering from this lack of transparency in the existing data that has been collected in mass.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get to this point where we've gotten so good at gathering data and not sharing it?
Yeah. It's wild, isn't it?
It is. Tell me who you are and what you do.
My name is Greg Mushen, and I've had a long career in technology and currently working on my own projects.
And what are your current projects?
I'm actually working on a test for metabolic health, and it will take an oral glucose tolerance test, and then it'll be able to tell you if you have insulin resistance, and if so, which tissues those are in. So it can pretty closely mimic the results of a eugenic clamp, but at a much lower price. So instead of paying, $2,000, $5,000 for a eugenic clamp, hopefully I'll be able to target around $200.
Sounds cool. I do have to tell you though, somebody like a technologist going into the nutrition space, I don't know, it sounds suspicious.
Might be dangerous. Seen it fail many times before.
Well, let's rewind it, because if you've watched the podcast before, I like to get into some background.
Yeah.
Where did you start career-wise? What kind of technology were you into?
I actually started as a web marketing intern. And so I started there. I was just helping place ads. This was kind of at the beginning of the internet. And I was the econ major at the time. And I thought that using constrained optimization would be a great way to optimize their ad spend. But the problem was I needed data. And so, long story short, I went and found the data, but in order to process it, I needed to write some custom software. So that's what ultimately got me into tech.
And this is all, if it's beginning of the internet, this is before the dot-com boom.
It was kind of right in the middle of it. So it was 1998.
Gotcha.
Yeah. 97, 98.
So where were you at when it all flipped to the other side?
Let's see. When it flipped to the other side, I was at this company called Open Design. And it was a brutal time. So the company was pretty interesting. It was the first company that Nathan Myhrvold and Edward Jung started after they left Microsoft. And they were the CTO and chief software architect, respectively. And so it was a very interesting startup, but probably the worst timing. We, unfortunately, around that time in 2001, it was when 9/11 happened. And we were just getting our Series A at the time. But unfortunately, during that event, the people who were going to sign the check, their building was right by the World Trade Centers.
Oh my gosh.
And
wow.
Yeah, and unfortunately got destroyed. And I think some of them were impacted. And then at that time, all funding, dried up for a couple of years. So I remember at that time, a lot of talented software developers, really exceptional technologists, were kind of moving into other careers. Like one of my friends became a skydiving instructor, as an example. So that was a really kind of a dark time, not just in the country, but also in technology.
I kind of want to kind of set this up for people who, at this point, there's a bunch of people who are younger who just don't have that familiarity of what the context was of that time. So we're talking about the dot-com boom, ultimately led to the dot-com bust, the
Yes.
bubble, which is at around 1999, 2000, we're suddenly seeing the pop. Now, it wasn't super, super bad, but it did get worsened by 9/11.
Yeah, it sure
And
did.
we have something in common because one of my first, I think it may have been my first real business. We were developing shaped CD-ROMs. Were you aware of that at the time?
Yeah.
So there was this interesting demand for not just people had not only computers with CD drives, but there was interesting ways you could shape the CDs. And the shape of the CD, so long as the edges of it could fit within the ring that would slide in, then it was a viable CD that could be used, so long as the inner ring that could be read would work. And that became kind of a marketing angle, right? Because you could make interesting shapes out of them. And we were making one, it was basically a card, like a business card, for Rocky Flats. Rocky Flats is this nuclear trigger manufacturer in, I want to say it's between Golden and Boulder, Colorado. And so very secure, lots of...
about as secure as you get, I would imagine.
Yes, about as secure as you get. And interestingly, they were being decommissioned. So they were actually slowly dismantling, and they were supposed to be completely cleared out sometime in, I want to say 2006, 2007. But in the meantime, they did have a number of folks that in that decommissioning were high-level executives who were finding where they were going to take their new business that they were starting. So it's this huge opportunity for us because not only were we doing this for Rocky Flats, but in that Shape CD-ROM, as part of what we negotiated, we had links out to our new business.
Oh, perfect.
So that we could pitch it. And it was all set to be released on something called Family Day, because Rocky Flats had once a year an event where family could come and visit the facility, because it's otherwise a very highly secure facility. That was, if I'm remembering correctly, on set for September 17th, 16th, or 17th
of 2001.
of 2001.
Oh no!
So of course we're like, yeah, pretty soon this Family Day is going to drop, and we have all of these shaped CDs, and they're all linking back to us for all of these brand new businesses.
Oh no!
And I remember my dad calling me in the morning because I had been up all night coding. He goes, "We're under attack." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like terrorists are attacking us. And I'm thinking, I must be dreaming this.
Yeah.
And I'm turning on the TV and I'm blown away by what I'm watching. And I couldn't comprehend the fact even then that we were about to be shut out of all of this business that we invested into. And so we have this in common because it was such a disruption. And getting back to this larger context of the dot-com bubble and burst, this really added to the burst. A whole bunch. I mean, literally, you saw the industry just shift in real time. And a lot of it got slowed down. A lot of investor dollars dried up quickly. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it was surreal to watch. I remember that day so clearly because I got into work early that day, and somebody had taken a TV, put it in the kitchen, and everybody was gathered around it. And that was just such a surreal day just to watch that footage. And then, I think that at that time there was so much, mourning as a nation for, probably a month or two after. It was just a pretty dark time.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm in half a century old territory. Definitely, it was unlike any other time I've ever experienced.
Yeah, there's nothing I've experienced like that.
Every time somebody says, "Oh, I've never experienced something like a recent current event," I'm like, I'm telling you, 9/11 was unlike anything.
Yeah,
unlike anything ever.
Unlike anything. Yeah.
So with that happy note to start off on, let's get back to where you went next.
So after that, I went to a series of companies, but I was in engineering and then went into engineering management, and then ultimately into product management. And that's kind of where I spent the last, I would say, 12 years of my career. And those were both like my 12 favorite, and also I think the 12 most stressful.
Hmm.
But product was really interesting. I think it taught me like a new way to think, because when you're in product management, you have kind of all of the responsibility, but none of the authority.
Right.
Nobody reports to you, so
Mhm.
you can't get things through by force. The only way that you can do it is through influence. And so, typically the way that teams are structured is you'll have an engineering team that you work with, or maybe multiple engineering teams, um, and you're trying to figure out what to build that people are going to buy. And so you're kind of caught between the engineers who really want proof that what you're going to build, they don't want to be wasting their time, and so they're typically some of the sharpest people. So you have to convince them, and then there are going to be all sorts of constraints about what you can do, what you can't do, what's going to be the first product that you're going to ship, what are the things that you're going to cut from all the things that you wanted, and so you're kind of caught between them and then the executives, with almost no buffer in between. So I think that I had a really amazing mentor during that time, and his name's John Kim, and he was our chief product officer at the time. He was at Expedia, and he really took me under his wing, but he really taught me how to think a lot more sharply. So he would come in and really kind of stress test my ideas, and ask me, what kind of data do you have backing that? What kind of proof points do you have? But then he wouldn't stop at the first layer. If I brought him a data set, he'd be like, okay, well, did you do decile analysis on that? And at first I'd be like, oh no, but that's probably a pretty good idea. Then I bring it back, a decile analysis, and of course it would show amazing data. So he just had this great intuition, and he's probably one of the sharpest thinkers that I knew, but he was a really big influence on me. And then another person, his name's Dave Fleischman, kind of took me under his wing as well, because I'd moved from engineering. I knew like nothing about product. And Dave Fleischman was also like an incredible influence and just an incredible thinker.
Can you think of a story that you're able to share on a particular product that kind of illustrates these dynamics? Because I think a lot of people don't get to hear this very often. I'm certainly very familiar
Yeah.
with the challenges you're describing, because in companies, without question, when you're very small, you're wearing lots of hats.
Mm-hmm.
So you're both the product developer and also the marketer.
Yes.
You're also taking the meetings with the would-be clients, or you're trying to determine how it is that you can get out to customers. But naturally, as a company gets bigger, it needs to individualize these jobs. It needs to specialize. But the catch is that now you have awareness divided as well, right? And so if you're on the engineering side, you can become a bit hyper-focused on some things that may not be actually as beneficial to the company, but you don't even know that necessarily. And other people can as well. What's a good example of where you're designing a product and the lack of space between you and the executives becomes a challenge?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, and this one actually wasn't a new product. It was optimizing an existing one. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, it'll illustrate it well. So at the time, I think mobile, wasn't quite at the saturation rate that it was now. And I was at the time I'd moved in, it was head of global flights product for shopping for all of Expedia. And what we were noticing was that our conversion was significantly lower on mobile. And so we saw two things. Our conversion was not what it was on desktop, but we were seeing these huge increases in mobile traffic. And so this is a problem that we had to solve. And I was modeling it out so that I could see, what would it be like if we did nothing. And that was kind of a scary picture. So got a couple teams that were dedicated to that, and we kind of attacked it from a couple different angles. One, just looking at it and using it ourselves, and just formulating a lot of hypotheses. Because I'm sure you're aware of this. A lot of times in digital products, you can think something's going to work, and you ship it out, and you're very wrong.
Yep.
In fact, looking at kind of my success rate, and then those of my peers, if you were at about 30% right, you were doing really well. It's kind of baseball averages. So your experiments will fail more than they will succeed. And so the strategy is to increase the number of experiments that you're running.
A lot of people don't realize this is the game of investors.
Yeah,
Like
it's very similar.
The typical high-level Silicon Valley investor is fully aware that the majority of businesses they're investing in may be going belly up. But they're looking for something you'll hear a lot called a unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
And a unicorn is a Facebook, it's an Apple, it's an Airbnb, it's an Uber, something along those lines. The one that turns out to take off and then makes it worth it because it covers all of the expenses for all of the other things that they took a position in.
Yeah, exactly.
That ultimately tanked. And so by the same token, if you're in a larger company, they rarely make one product that they say, let's put all of our eggs in this one basket.
Right, exactly.
They know the products are not necessarily going to make it. And sometimes a product fails the first time around, but you feel like you've got data on what it is you need to improve on such that it's not worth killing the whole line.
Yeah.
But again, gets back to some amount of this is just gut instinct.
Yeah, a lot of it is.
Yeah.
A lot of it is, it's like this incredible mix between just intuition. And I think there are some people out there that have amazing product intuition. But it's this blend of intuition and then just factual data, and really kind of blending those two. So you have a defensible hypothesis, and then multiple ways which you can kind of achieve that.
There's this great new term that is called toxic positivity. Have you ever heard this term?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So when I was first introduced to it, granted, it was in a context of game development because it was actually a fellow engineer who was the first to tell me about this. The issue was that there was such, in the place that he was working with, which I'm not going to share, there was such a pushback at being critical of other projects of what people were working on, such that you would get concerned about even expressing negative sentiment.
Yeah.
And he just kept saying, this is just totally unworkable, and I think this company is going to go down. And spoiler alert, the company is not doing well at all. It hasn't dissipated entirely. But this gets back to just like this larger other issue, which is this being honest.
Yes.
Internal honesty.
Yes.
With when something is not working, even if it seemed really good to you and your team and everybody else internally, like this is really great. But the data are the data.
Yeah.
And if you yourself can see where there's cracks and problems, you may not want to be the unpopular person in the room to point it out, but you're doing a disservice to the company, to the team.
Yeah.
If you're holding that to yourself, and it could turn out to be super relevant to everybody's livelihood.
Absolutely. And if you don't kind of make a team that has that culture where it's okay to be critical, then I think that it's a lot harder to succeed. Because everybody's going to have a slightly different viewpoint, or they'll see something that's like slightly wrong that you need to address. And so, I think feedback is a gift. I think having people speak up when you can see those problems early, I mean, you can just save a lot of time. And I think the one thing about product that will teach you pretty quick is, ego has no place in it, because
Yeah.
you can be in love with an idea and ship it and nobody will buy it, nobody will use it. And so I think it does kind of teach you over time that um, hypotheses are a lot stronger than opinions.
Yeah. Right.
Those are the more valuable aspect.
So then somewhere in there, you take a turn because you have a before picture
Yes.
in your profile, and then you have an after. And I believe I've heard a snippet of this in another podcast, but why don't you tell me what happened?
Yeah. So, I was always interested in health, but I went through this phase where I got a little bit too focused on work. It was during COVID. And so I kind of let my diet go a little bit. I let my exercise go. And I remember I stepped on the scale and I was 199. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to cross that 200-pound threshold unless I'm like pretty ripped. And around the same time, I had a daughter. I had a daughter when I was 40, and I'm 49 now. She's 9 years old. But I went to this wedding, and there was a bride in her 40s, and she kind of paused the wedding because her father wasn't there to walk her down the aisle. And so both of these things happened, around the same time. And
So it was meant to, her father was supposed to be there and wasn't able to make it, like he was late.
well, he had died.
Oh, wow.
And so he was, just not able to make it there at all. But she didn't have anyone walk her down the aisle, I think, because, she wanted her father to take that place. And so that really, hit me pretty hard. And, I was kind of doing the math, and I'm like, wow, I'd have to be, 89 if she gets married late, or, 80, 89, and still be able to walk my daughter down the aisle. And that was like really motivating to me. And to think about, I really wanted to be around for my daughter as long as possible. And so I think that, in conjunction with, hitting 199 on the scale, was really motivating to me. And I'd also gotten a little bit of mold exposure from this project that I was working on at the time. And so I was
You're the third guest to bring this up, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we just, everyone out there, watch for mold exposure.
Yes.
Because it's a real thing and you don't know it's happening.
No, you don't.
Usually until health effects are giving you an indicator.
Yeah. I was, sleeping near this thing of mold that was so big. We thought it was like mushrooms. The mold spores were that big. And, I've been sleeping for 6 months, like 4 feet away from it. And so what it ended up causing was like a lot of depression. And then we just spent like months trying to figure out what it was. And luckily I had this doctor who had mold exposure himself and thought to test for it. And sure enough, so we found that, and all of this was happening around the same time. And then I went to my friend PJ's birthday party. PJ's 10 years older than I am. He's been in fitness his entire life. And he was like once a competitive tower runner. And so he was, I think, top 20 in the world, if I recall.
What's a tower runner?
So they have these races where you literally race up a building on the stairs. And it's arguably, one of the most intense sports there is. They're just like redlining, for like 10 minutes, basically. So he's just shredded, always been in incredible shape. But he was turning 57 at the time. I went to his birthday party, and our mutual friend John was there, who's an incredibly funny guy. He walks up to me and says, "Hey, good to see you. Do you want to get ripped?" Those are the first words out of his mouth. I was thinking, yeah, actually, I do. So PJ, John, and we joined this like body transformation challenge together. And I got some incredible coaching from them. That's where a good portion of that transformation came from. And it just so happened that kind of all three of those things were lining up at the same time.
That's pretty cool. I kind of had a thing like that happen to me with Dr. Ben, who I've also had on this podcast. I have not been good about making time and staking it out to work out. And his program was a literally 15 minutes twice a week, strict training
That's
to
great.
failure,
Mm-hmm.
which legitimately changed my life. And I'm now practically a promoter for people like me. It would be better if I spent more time than that. But what I like about that is there's just no excuse.
There's no excuse.
There's no come on, you can fit in 15 minutes twice a week. Come on. And I've literally gotten stronger and stronger doing just those 2 appointments over and over again. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. But it helps me drive home to others. I am certainly aware that you need to build strength, especially, or if anything, you need to retain strength.
Yes.
As you get older and older.
Yeah.
And it gets harder and harder to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to at least build habits to maintain as long as you can. And one other thing you brought up in another podcast that I really wanted to go into is walking. Sounds so basic, right?
Yeah.
But yet walking is something else that I've always appreciated in life. And one of my favorite founding fathers, John Adams, was an avid walker.
Oh, yeah.
And lived way late. I mean, at a time where people didn't regularly live into their late 80s. Himself lived to quite an old age.
Yeah, it's amazing how many of those like great thinkers were also walkers, like avid walkers.
Right.
Just like a long lineage of them.
So he says, you want to get ripped.
Yeah.
You said, let's do it.
And that's actually where walking came in. So I remember he called me once and started chewing me out of all the things that I was doing wrong. And I didn't even know that I was supposed to do anything. So he told me about like the macros that I needed to target. We talked about some foods, and then we talked about walking. And so he encouraged me to walk at least 12,000 steps. And so I was pretty curious about that, but I wanted to kind of push it and go a little faster. So I asked him, what about 17,000? It's like, oh yeah, that'd be even better. Do 17,000 if you can. And so this is during the summer in Seattle, which is pretty much the only time of year that it's nice, all 2 weeks of it. Doesn't last long there, but just beautiful weather. And I was going on these really long walks. And I just felt like my body was transforming. Like I could almost feel like the fat melting off. And I know that wasn't actually what was happening, but in my mind, that's what I associated with it. And actually, at the time, it was. I remember the 11th day into that contest, I started seeing abs started poking through, and I couldn't believe it. And that was just really, really motivating. And so for probably about 3 months, I walked 17,000 steps, and it was just beautiful weather. The scenery is incredible in Seattle. Really, really enjoyable. But I just saw the results because I was losing so much body fat, and I was starting to get ripped. And I probably lost 10 or 15. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was a lot, and enough to expose all my abs. And I was just so satisfied with those results. And I learned so much from that experience because I realized that fat loss can be pretty simple in terms of how you approach it. Just like a slight caloric deficit, get enough protein so you can retain muscle, and then it's a little easier, I found, by increasing that deficit through activity than it is for me by going lower calorie.
Well, that was my next question. What changes did you make to your diet?
So I think probably the biggest change was amount of protein intake. And once I started tracking it, I realized that I just simply wasn't getting enough. I was targeting about, a gram per pound of body weight, which is, pretty standard. Um, Standard in, I would say, like the bro science world. I think the more scientific number is like 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, which I think is zero point 0.7 grams per pound or so.
Now, naturally, you being in Seattle, I'm sure you're familiar with Ted Naiman.
No, I'm not.
You're not. You're
No,
not. Okay.
I need to write this down.
So Ted Naiman originally was much more low carb, keto. Now is kind of more known for, I hope I'm stating this correctly, the PE model, as in protein to energy. So he treats fat and carbs as functionally equivalent, but that the more you increase your protein, the more you increase satiety, and that people will chase protein they don't realize that they're chasing until they get up to a certain level of adequacy. And therefore, if you're trying to lose weight, odds are if you increase your protein relative to the energy, you're going to end up succeeding at losing weight, at least up, down to the level that you'd probably need to get to.
I think that makes a lot of sense. From my personal experience, that seems to be the case. When you go high protein, you do get that satiety. Protein and fiber, I feel like, have been the two levers for me that really satiate me.
Now, I will, if people look at your pinned, what we're talking about is you have a pinned tweet in your profile. So if somebody goes to your profile on X right now, they'll see your before, your after. Certainly there's going to be a number of people that are like, oh, his before is not like, you were morbidly obese or anything like that. But that said, definitely a massive transformation from picture 1 to picture 2. No question.
Yeah.
That wasn't all from walking.
No, it wasn't all from walking.
You obviously have added a workout regime.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I started out in this body transformation competition that we had. It was through First Form, and they just had in the app, they had some workouts. But I think I just started with, 3 days a week, and it was like a full body routine. And after a while, I wanted to do a little bit more. And then I discovered, how many sets that I needed per body part to really, increase and kind of maximize hypertrophy. And so I think I did the full body for about 3 months, and that was good for like getting me in the habit. I don't think I probably wouldn't have succeeded if I'd chosen to do more days. But like you were saying with the 15-minute workouts, for me, like going 3 days a week, I could commit to that. And so I became pretty consistent with that. And then I started adding in, a little bit more volume. And I think I went up to 4 days and moved it to a split. But I think I started in July, around February, I felt like I'd hit a wall. February, around there. And in that May, I hired a coach, and that made a huge difference. That was just kind of like night and day for somebody that actually knew what they were doing, to do my programming for me, and to look at my body and realize which parts needed work, and work that into the programming. So that was probably one of the bigger changes that I made, and moved up to 5 days a week with pretty considerable volume.
For people who don't know, particularly working with Dr. Ben, working with somebody who it's their job to guide you and take you through the exercise, from a distance, you're probably going, oh, I just need to know what to do, and then I'll do that. No, there's really something powerful about feeling like you're a passenger.
Yes.
And somebody else is flying you,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't know until you've experienced it. Ideally, it's not one of these situations where, you go to a gym where it's like you get a trainer for the first time introductory thing. No, ideally it's somebody who like I said, it's their responsibility. Like it's their responsibility to take you to this certain place, and they're working back and forth with you. But for the most part, your only job is to show up.
Yeah.
And then do as much of what they tell you to do as you can pull off doing. And it's surprising how much more you can do.
Yes. You can do a lot more.
Yeah, when it's that kind of a relationship.
Mhm.
I definitely would say for anybody who's trying to make this happen, don't underestimate how this can be a game changer for you, especially if you've just had a tough time doing it. I'm very socially motivated, so it makes a big difference to me to know that I have to meet a person.
Right.
Then if it's
Yeah.
doing if it's on my own, I am not as good and I'll have other responsibilities that get in the way. But I know I have to meet somebody that also helps.
Yeah, that accountability.
Right. And so in my mind, I'm always thinking about it in terms of, you know what, especially for the 15 minutes, 9 a.m., I just need to be there. 9:15, I'm done. I can get back to this thing that I'm on right now that I feel like I can't pause on. But I can pause for 15 minutes. I was going to do that anyway.
Right.
So fine, I'll do that. And then again, I don't feel like it's a lot of proactive effort in my conscious executive, function mind because I'm being talked through it. And I just need to put in the work and the effort while being directed. And then that's it. I get to the other side and I'm done.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I'm one of those
You just don't
people.
have to think.
I'm one of those people that have never really enjoyed the during of intensive strength training.
Mm.
I do it because I feel like I need to do it. I do feel good that it happened.
Yes.
So that after it happened, it's not, I don't know. I just, the way I'm wired, I just don't get that endorphin rush in the same way other people do in the during and the after. But cognizantly, I'm like, I'm glad I did that. And so for all the time outside of the workout, that I really feel, and it's
Yeah.
very present.
I actually think that's a really important point. I think in any change that you're going to make is engineering for that outcome. Because if you can feel good about what you did, it doesn't even matter if it's perfect. But take 2 examples. You don't work out, you work out for 15 minutes. Maybe it's not your best one, but you're happy you showed up.
Right.
So if you can get to that point where you're happy you showed up and you feel accomplished, that's going to drive motivation for the next workout. And so I think it's start small, take increments. If you can keep that motivation loop going, then you'll be in a good place.
Yeah. So you get there, you get to greater and greater fitness, but you're not stopping there. Now you're actually engaging on it. When did you
Yes.
start getting into social media, chatting this up?
You know, it was actually a little while before, and it's kind of funny. I'm somewhat of a naturally, private person. Kind of keep to myself. But during this whole thing, where this started, so there's kind of a pre-story to this. So kind of this day that I decided I've got to do something about this 199. I don't want to cross the 200 threshold and be skinny fat. I kind of opened a spreadsheet and started writing down things that I could do to help myself. And one of those was I need to exercise more. And at the time, I was walking by this running trail in Seattle, just very famous, called the Burt Gilman. And I saw all these people running. I'm like, I should just do that because I live right by this trail. It doesn't take much equipment, and I can just start running. And so I think that if I remove equipment, remove going to the gym, I'll just be more likely to do it, and I'll start small. But there's a big problem with this, and it's that I hate running. And so I had this idea, and ChatGPT had just been released, and I was like, I once read this book called Atomic Habits. I'm like, I wonder if I could write a prompt using like the premises of Atomic Habits and ask ChatGPT to figure out how to get me addicted to running. Because if I could get addicted to running, then it wouldn't matter if I hated it. I want to do it more. And so I put in this prompt, like, hey, please help me get addicted to running. And I remember at first, like, it had all these safety things on, like, oh, addictions are really bad and you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, no, this is a healthy addiction. It's like, okay, you're right. And I'll put this plan. And I started looking at it. And I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. Because the first step was actually put your running shoes by the door.
Hmm.
That was day one. And I'm like, that's really easy. I can do that. And so I went and put my running shoes by the door. And then the second step was, okay, day two is put running in your calendar, 5 minutes. And so it's like, okay, I can do that too. And by day three, it was, run 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, I can definitely do that. And it just had this entire sequence um, worked out, but it worked. I got to the point where I really enjoyed it. I like looked forward to running. And so I
It's so funny
lost.
because we literally just got done talking about how being a passenger.
Yeah.
So here you got an explicit set of instructions, even though it's from an AI,
Yes.
but it worked for you.
It worked. And so I lost 26 pounds. And I was telling a former business partner about it. He's like, that is the coolest story. You should like post that on Twitter. At the time it was Twitter. And so I was like, hey, that's not a bad idea. And so I wrote this thread on how I got addicted to running using ChatGPT. And it went, I like wrote it on a Friday night, I believe, and went to bed. And I woke up and it had just gone viral. I'd never had a post go viral before. And I'm like, wow, that is just so wild. I remember Greg Brockman, who was one of the founders of OpenAI, like quote tweeted it saying, this is like next generation. I can't remember what he said, but it's like, this is interesting AI thought. And, but that part didn't really motivate me too much, like getting the exposure. But what did motivate me was I would get DMs from people and it would be like weeks later and they'd be like, hey, thanks for writing that thread. That really helped me. I actually tried it and it worked for me too. And it made a really big difference in my life. And I think at that point, I remember having this decision. It's like, I love getting those texts. I love, knowing that something that I wrote like helped somebody. And maybe that's more important than my internal fear of kind of exposure, writing stuff that everybody sees.
Getting back to how you're naturally a private person.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of had this internal battle, but decided that I'd rather see differences in people's lives. And if I could either motivate people or help them in some way, that it'd be worth it. Like even if it was one person. So that's kind of where it started.
It's hard to put into words how much that's been rocket fuel for me.
Yeah.
So with
Yeah,
my
I can imagine.
research, I mean, I don't know how much you follow me or, what it's taken to get to the other side of this thing.
Yeah.
It's not all rainbows and sunshine,
No.
but I get so many people that reach out, that write me, that DM me, that are like, I'm so thankful you're doing this research, and just I'm commiserating with you. It's hard for anybody who's ever feeling like, oh, this really helped me out a lot. I wonder if I should write, or probably they're not even going to pay attention. Trust me, you'd be surprised how many people are like us who that's what we need to do what we're doing, because it makes such a huge difference. It's big.
Yeah.
And it's I can certainly sympathize with what you're saying. I have the from the Own Your Labs desk. This is our version of a mid-roll ad. It's just my way of kind of waving in front of the camera. But it's from the desk. They usually do research on you, and then they feed me a question. So I have like 2 alternate questions. This is the first one. Were there any health issues, blood-related or not, that you paid attention to during your health journey? These could include things like energy level or mood.
Oh yeah. Well, at the beginning, I had such a low quality of life from the depression. That was caused by the mold. That was my number one goal. I was just like, I need to get out of this so I can have any kind of quality of life. And so that was number one. And luckily, it worked. The combination of changes that I made, along with a couple mold specific interventions, they worked after a few months, thankfully. And so that was kind of my first one. But then I started getting, my blood work and, looking at different markers. And I've always been really good about getting labs through the years. Um, Gosh, I think I have labs going back to probably my late 20s or something like that. And I've kept all of them. But I think that, being in my 40s, I was starting to be, concerned about some other things. I have some, I will say, like suboptimal genetics in terms of like lipids. So I have a copy of ApoE4, just one copy, and then
You're a 3-4?
3-4.
I'm
Yeah.
also a 3-4.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And then I also have LPA. So I have like pretty high LPA as well.
Are you able to share?
Yeah, it's been like up to 140, 150,
140?
around there.
Mhm.
Which is not where I'd like it to be. But I was able to kind of get that down. I was able to cut that in half actually.
Have you had a heart scan?
I've had a CAC scan, yeah, but I haven't done a clearly yet.
And are you comfortable sharing what your CAC scan
Yeah,
was?
CAC has been 0,
Okay,
which is
good.
great.
That's great.
Yeah. Knock on wood. I really want to get some imaging, because obviously there's some pretty big limitations in CAC.
So let's get into, how did you end up getting your LP(a) down?
I got it tested for the first time, I think in 2015 or 2016. And that was kind of a time before, it wasn't really well known, or as well known as it is now. But the doctor I've been going to, really recommended doing that. So that's when it kind of first put it on the map. And then around that same time is when I learned that I was ApoE 3-4, and so made some changes there. But yeah, that's when I first found out, and it's actually kind of a little bit frightening at the time, because I'm sure, as you're aware, there aren't too many well-known treatments for that.
Yeah.
They're coming out.
Do you want my opinion on that?
I actually do, because I know that, haven't you talked with Nick about this?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I should mention my colleague Siobhan Huggins, who, by the way, works with me on this podcast, is of my colleagues, has really took on LP(a), and right now she's much more focused on lipedema. But at the time that she was focusing a lot more on LP(a), she amassed a lot of interesting knowledge and research. But on top of that, she did a whole bunch of experiments, her own experiments, that are published right now at cholesterolcode.com. Had we been more into, both of us now are publishing papers and so forth, but had we at that time been more into publishing papers, then she almost certainly would have published hers as a case study, because it's a fantastic one.
I've got to look at this.
Yeah. Check out cholesterolcode.com/LPA.
Okay, that's easy to remember.
Yeah. You'll see her talk there. And I think, I'm not sure, but she may link to the, she's got a graph that actually shows all the changes. And basically, this is the gist of what she was proving. First of all, she was proving what we called then the inversion pattern. Let me explain what that is real quick. Basically, LDL and LDLP can go up and down based on how much I'm consuming. It's called inversion pattern because if I right now decided to gorge on a whole bunch of, keto food, in spite of the fact that I'm consuming a lot more saturated fat and just fat in general, the more I'm consuming, the more my LDL will go down. And ultimately, the more my LDLP will go down. It's a different time frame, though, for that. Conversely, if I don't eat anything tomorrow, what's going to happen is instead, it's going to go up. My LDL and my LDLP will go up. part of this is because during this period of time while I'm fat adapted, we would offer that it follows the lipid energy model. You probably read our paper by
Yeah.
this point. And part of the transient dynamics is that in the moment in time where I'm consuming a lot, I'm putting away more of that fat into my adipocytes. So there's greater turnover of the ApoB containing lipoproteins, not only delivering it, but the piece that's unpublished, but that I believe strongly in, and I need to amass more data for, is that there's also greater endocytosis of the ApoB lipoproteins for the structure of the adipocytes themselves. Now, that's not the only thing. There's other components. There's going to be higher overall insulin bolus. That's going to be relevant for lipoprotein lipase and that turnover. But conversely, if we flip the script and I'm eating less, or for that matter, fasting overall, now my adipocytes are releasing more because we're in a state of scarcity, but they're not taking up as much.
Oh, okay.
So more of those VLDLs are floating. And that's why also you tend to see, for example, higher triglycerides and correspondingly lower HDL because there's less turnover. Now, let me take this back to Lp(a). Lp(a) in Siobhan, and has been confirmed by other people, tracks with those patterns. So her Lp(a) will go up with LDL-C. It'll go down with LDL-C. She could make her Lp(a) drop like a rock tomorrow. I could say, get your blood work right now. And in 3 days from now, I want you to take your Lp(a) and say, cut it in half. She could do it right now. She could down a whole bunch of keto shakes and so forth, and it would tank, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And it'd tank more than probably any medication you could be putting out. Why? Because your lipids are affected by metabolism.
Right.
This is a, as you probably heard me a few times now, it's a source of frustration for me because whenever there's blood work done now, it used to be that it needed to be fasted for your doctor. So your doctor would say you need to get blood work, you need to get fasted, and so people would go for the 12 hours fasted, and then they get in the next morning. That's stronger data than, oh, well, I just ate a couple hours ago, and they're like, that's all right. We don't have it in the guidelines anymore for it to be fasted.
I didn't realize that it had been removed.
Yes. It's a source of frustration for me because not only does that affect people on a mixed diet, but people on a keto diet, that's going to totally change their lipid panel.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're literally installing fat.
That's right.
From their meal, right? So their triglycerides being higher is not a surprise.
Yeah.
Anyway, take this back to Lp(a). What's the other major thing? So we just got done with the metabolism. We got done with how the lipid energy model, all that ties in. It's an acute phase reactant. So as it happens, Siobhan got sick a few times. When she got sick, wisely, she went and got her Lp(a) along with other inflammatory markers. And it coincided with the other inflammatory markers going up. And unlike most people, she already had her metabolism mapped because of those other tests. She knew based on her dietary logs what her Lp(a) would have been if she was not sick.
Amazing. So she could isolate just the effect of being sick.
Correct. Now, I'm going to assume her opinion's still this, but she's not here to tell me. But we're skeptical as to whether or not genetically high Lp(a) in the absence of other elevated inflammasomes is in fact the problem it's assumed to be. Now,
yeah, I've heard this argument.
I'm going to say it's a hypothesis because
Right.
my colleagues in the research will skewer me for it because Lp(a) is definitely the new hotness. Right. But this all comes back around to an ongoing theme that I'm going to keep bringing up over and over again, which is, listen, before we can claim this elevated number is associated with this disease outcome, we need to know that it's not pleiotropic. We need to know that it's not literally the definition of confounded, because there's something that's a third thing that's affecting both.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my expanded opinion on Lp(a).
It also kind of makes me wonder, like, for the studies that have been done on Lp(a) that have shown that it's more atherogenic, like what was the composure of that of the test group? Were they all metabolically healthy?
No, they're almost always never metabolically healthy. There's
Yeah.
even in ones where it's a mixed population, usually they have a bunch of people who are part of the disease, part of the population. And the concern that I have is the diseases themselves, such as metabolic syndrome. Literally, 2 of the components of the 5 criteria are lipids, are HDL and triglycerides, right? And so a place that I've remarked on many times before in this podcast, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about more, is I don't have the same level of confidence you and many others do that no worries, through statistical instruments like sensitivity analyses, we've accounted for all of these other confounders and we've subtracted them from the equation so that we know just how much this particular variable of interest actually is causal. Getting back to the engineer in me, I'm going to be like, data.
Absolutely.
I want data. So in the case of somebody who has genetically high Lp(a), at least at the time that I was talking to Siobhan, and to be fair, this was at the time that she was most obsessed about this, I want to say it was 4 or 5 years ago. At that time, she could not find any data that did in fact isolate Lp(a) in the absence of other inflammatory markers, other acute phase reactants.
Oh, really?
That showed a corresponding association between that and cardiovascular disease outcome.
That's a really interesting finding, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, I'll play the devil's advocate to ourselves, which is, granted, there's just not a lot of studies done on healthy people, which is
unfortunately
a scientific tragedy.
It really is.
You should be absolutely the most interested in any population for which something is high that you wanted to study in the absence of other things, which is, why it came back around to lean mass hyperresponders for me in our research, is you want to get that one variable absent the other things that it clusters with that are confounders. Don't trust the statistics. Don't trust the modeling before you can trust the data and apps, in the absence of those others.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and if you're doing studies on just metabolically unhealthy people, the statistics are going to tell you the distributions in metabolically unhealthy people.
Exactly.
And that's not going to generalize. Unless you study those people too.
But lipids seem to be an incredible exception. So there's we take a veer over to that real quick, because that is something that you've commented on a lot. It's something you do believe, right? Like, it's fair for me to say, and this is a safe space, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I would say that you have a very, from the podcast I've listened to, from reading your thread on LDL, it's very conventional with regard to exposure over time is a concern.
I would say for
LDL,
that,
right?
From that perspective, yes.
Now, if I were to say we should reopen the topic of Mendelian randomization, you would feel confident that that's probably the best. I think you've even said that in one of the podcasts I was listening to. That was kind of what shut the book for you. Right?
Yeah,
closed
that's
the book
right.
for you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
How much have you looked into Mendelian randomization studies on LDL and cardiovascular disease?
Well, I've read the papers, but by the way that you phrased that, I'm guessing that you've gone deeper.
I mean, to be fair, I would not say that it's my expertise, but it certainly was one of the places I went to first. I have a question that I've asked for, I want to say 10 years, that has gone unanswered. But it's a fascinating one because the question, people keep feeling like they have answered the question, but then it doesn't get answered. So I'm gonna set this up a little bit more. I'm gonna lay this on a little thick for good reason. You'll see why in a moment. This question, it was understandably the first one that I would ask because it's the most relevant one. It's the one that I've continued to ask, and you'll see I've asked on social media. You can investigate it after this podcast over and over again. I've asked it to people on podcasts. I've brought it up in blog posts, and either there's a, that's interesting, I'll have to look into that kind of answer, or the answer is one that's different from what the direct response would be. Okay, you ready for the question?
Yeah, I'm ready.
If LDL being lower lifelong is reducing cardiovascular disease without any material detriment, then those people with lifelong low LDL should have the lowest all-cause mortality. They should be outliving all of us.
Yes.
Now, I'll ask that question of somebody. I'll say, this is where Mendelian randomization should shine. We should be able to categorically grab, say, everybody who had lifelong LDL of 70 milligrams per deciliter or lower, because that's a common cut point brought about. And we should see a clear signal of longevity, a clear one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll save you some time.
But we don't.
We don't. Correct. We don't.
Yep.
We do have Mendelian randomization studies that show elevated LDL associating with reduced longevity. I'll flip it, with greater all-cause mortality.
Mm-hmm.
The catch with that, though, is we're looking at the other side. We're not looking at longevity. We want to see it on both sides, right?
Yep.
The other piece of that, though, is that one's a little bit harder to discern for reasons I'll get into in a second, mainly because they're, again, clustering.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you have a genetic disposition towards being over fat, will that have an impact on your lipids?
Yes.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
That's the correct answer.
Yeah.
Typically,
Mm-hmm.
right? I shouldn't say always, but typically.
Yeah, most of the time.
This gets back to metabolic syndrome. Okay, so now let me bring it back to longevity. If you live your whole life with low LDL, you should live longer, given the present day lipid hypothesis. So, where's the data? Where's the data on that?
Okay, so yeah. So this is where it gets really kind of weird and nuanced, because I'm sure that you're familiar with the U-shaped curve.
Right.
Yeah. So I did a thread on this, once, but let me back up. So I think one of the issues with looking at lipids and LDL is one of the first things that's wrong with it is, and I don't know if you believe this, but it is I think like a lifelong disease. It's something that accumulates over a long period of time, and so we're talking about a disease that is really going to start for some people. I've seen it like as low as like 3-year-olds. Have you seen that data?
Yeah.
So literally it can start.
And just to emphasize, there is of course the cases of those with homozygous FH for sure. You see it not only in 3-year-olds, but it's symptomatic.
Yes.
In many 3-year-olds with homozygous FH. Yeah,
that's wild. But it just goes to show that this is something that can develop over a very, very long period of time. So it's this very, very long time window. But another problem with it is our studies are really short. So if you look at a lot of the studies.
Which studies though? What do you mean?
Well, obviously like Mendelian randomization, that's not short. That's going to be over the life. But if you look at like statin trials, they're looking at it over the course of 5 years. It's unless you have a really large N or.
Yeah, it's usually actually shorter. It's usually like 2.2 years was I think the average of the top 25. I went to look that up because I was curious.
That's crazy that it's 2.5, but it's very hard to see that level of resolution that you kind of need to see lifelong disease in a very short period of time, unless you're selecting for people, in the case of statins that are maybe like in late stage or something like that, and only running it on those. But so we kind of have this structural problem in how a lot of these tests are done. One reason I like Mendelian randomization is because of the length of it. But then you have this U-shaped curve problem. Mm-hmm. And you look at that and it's very clear. You've got, and this has been replicated multiple times.
Just to expand that for anybody listening, what you're referring to is if right this moment in time we go to NHANES, because I played with NHANES. NHANES is an open data set that people can download right now from the CDC. And you do an association between all-cause mortality and LDL. You're going to see what you're describing, a U-shaped curve where those actually, it's more like a hockey stick. The people with the
Yeah.
lowest LDL at the time that they're getting their blood work are going to have the highest association to all-cause mortality in the shortest amount of time.
Yeah. It's actually
And
higher than the other side of the curve.
correct. So from looking at it strictly associationally, it looks like lowest LDL is the worst.
That's right.
Which I think is setting up what you're probably going to be going into next.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
But then you start thinking about, that, and there can be a lot of conditions that can, cause lower LDL. Like cachexia would be one, or muscle wasting would be another, certain liver diseases. So there's kind of an argument that there could be an element, and I'll be very clear about that, because I don't think it's all reverse causation that we're seeing there, but I do think that there is an element.
I do, by the way. I think that there's absolutely concern for reverse causality, as it's often stated. In other words, are there diseases that both lower your LDL and also will kill you?
Yes, I think so.
And
there are a lot.
No, there definitely are. Right.
Yeah.
So this gets us to this other thing called censoring, where when you're looking at associational data, you can say, okay, let's ignore everybody who died within a certain time frame.
Yeah.
Usually like say 2 or 3
to 5
years.
years. Yeah.
Right. And then only look at people who survived at least that amount of time and then on, and then see if the curve is still the same.
That's right. Yep. And there've been a couple studies. There's this really famous one in Japan that they ran that looked at that. Because a lot of these papers will say that even kind of when adjusting for these things, they'll still see a little bit of it. There was the Hawaiian heart study, I want to say, that also looked into this. But I think that, and I'll pause here for a bit, because I do have some data on this that I could bring up, where I started going through a lot of these and just trying to determine if they were controlled well or not. So, in the absence of those, I will say that, a lot of people, there's still something going on there, because even when you remove an element of those people, there's still a bit of an association.
With low LDL and mortality?
Yeah.
Or gotcha.
Yeah. And what I don't know is, this is what I'm really curious about, because, a lot of them, they'll only remove certain diseases. Or some of them are only done in I think the Hawaiian heart health study had this segment where it's everybody over 70. And that was the cohort that they analyzed. Well, there's a lot of stuff that could be going on with people in that age bracket that may not have been removed. So I guess I would say it is seemingly this contradiction, because like you were saying, you would expect the Mendelian randomization and those to line up almost exactly.
Yes.
Why don't they?
Yes. And to kind of state the quiet part out loud, if there was a signal of longevity clearly indicated in existing associational data, I think it would have been published 100 times over by this point. Because
that's actually a really good point.
I don't it's not an active focus as much as me doing the lean mass hyperresponder research. But when I have myself played with NHANES data, which is a fairly robust data set. I mean, I want to say it's 90,000 people at this point. You can do exactly what we're now describing. I can do associational, and I posted it to Twitter. I haven't published on it, but it's been actual. I think I even ran one a month ago just because I was curious if they updated their mortality data. And this stretches out, I want to say, over 19 years. So you can, in fact, censor as much as, say, 5 years or even 10 years. And what you would expect is that at a certain point, it's got to flip. At a certain point, you've ruled out reverse causality up to X range, to where now there should be a low LDL that associates with greater longevity.
Yep.
but it doesn't happen at any level of censoring I have done as of yet.
Yeah,
Right.
that's really interesting.
Now, if I'm trying to play devil's advocate on the other side, they would go, well, you're not adjusting for fill in blank 1, fill in blank 2, fill in blank 3. And again, I want to be intellectually honest. Hey, if you have a case to make for what adjustments are appropriate to plug in, let's debate that, but let's debate it separately. Because in the meantime, it's not that I'm trying to make the case that low LDL causes a greater amount of mortality, like many people would. No, I'm actually just saying that's powerful data against it.
Yes.
Observational data is not great at proving things unless you get really high in the Bradford Hill criteria. It is, however, really good at disproving things that are assumed.
And I would say, like, to your point, it replicates even outside of NHANES. I think the KHANES data out of Korea has a couple million people, and it replicates there too.
Yeah, and that's and this is the irony. The irony is that I'm already coming from a place that's outside of 99% of everyone you're listening to. Although Austin Donetsky we're very much aligned on this one.
Yeah. Austin's great.
Yeah, everybody's coming at it from a lipoprotein centric model because they're the cause du jour, right? They're the initiators, and either you're coming from a lipid hypothesis centric point in which it's every ApoB containing lipoprotein or all atherogenic. Maybe small dense is more atherogenic than quote unquote big fluffy, but they all are. They're all atherogenic. The particles themselves are initiating and driving atherosclerosis. Or there's a lot of people in low carb space who'll go, well, the big fluffy are fine. The small dense are the problem. Because I'm now pattern A with more predominant big fluffy, I'm not worried about the small dense, or I'm not worried about the big fluffy. I'd be worried about the small dense if I had a lot of them. But because I'm pattern A, I'm not as worried about it. Or you're more interested in the oxidized LDL. That's really the problem. Those are the ones that are driving the disease and so forth. And here I am off in this corner off to the side going, or they're all patterns that are downstream. They are more the consequence than the cause. The challenge is that I've got to be able to say both things can be true at the same time. The patterns that you're seeing that's a snapshot in the blood can be downstream, but also they are participants in the process of atherosclerosis. The thing is, at the point where you're going, well, they are participants in the process of atherosclerosis, people are like, oh, well, so then why are we even talking about this? If they're participants, then just get them as low as you can. There's no downside to that, right?
Right.
My pushback to that is, I don't know that there's no downside to that. Looking back at the associational data, there may be. Yeah.
You can't really say there's no downside when that association exists.
Right. And that therein is the issue, is ultimately we come back to full circle to the original question I asked in the first place.
Yeah.
And just as sure as I'm asking it here to you now, and I'm not putting you on the spot, I'm putting the whole world on the spot that always just assumes that to be true. That if you get your LDL, you get your ApoB as low as you can, there's only benefit. There is no non-cardiovascular disease downside. Even if there are some associations for it, those associations just need to get adjusted, and then ultimately you find there's just only benefit, right?
Yeah. I think that there might be this other dimension that's not talked about a lot, which would be residence time.
Yeah.
And so, one way that you could potentially explain that, left tail of the curve is, you could have a low pool size that hangs around for a longer period of time, and that could be bad. Or you could have, a higher pool size that, you're going through 10 pools a day rather than 6 pools a day. And, theoretically that could be better, because just residence time is lower. So I don't think that's, for whatever reason, I feel like that's not talked about enough. And maybe the reason for that is because there are only really a couple lipid kinetic studies that have ever been run. Um, Most of them ran from like 2005 to 2008 or 2009. They were done with isotope tracers, and that's where you can really see the kinetic action, happen with ASR, which is the absolute secretion rate, and FCR, which
Fractional
is
catabolic rate.
fractional
Yeah.
catabolic rate, and you can really see the dynamics. And what's interesting is in a lot of these studies, they had people do exercise, and they started seeing these cut points. And I think they measured it in the amount of like caloric expenditure, where kind of this minimum threshold where you start seeing differences in the pool size moving was around 300 calories per day, which is almost nothing in terms of exercise. But that would be like the minimum threshold. And
they were tracing ApoB lipoproteins in this case, or
yeah, they did a couple different ones. So they were doing ApoBs, and then also I tried some with triglycerides, which were also like really interesting.
That one would be interesting because I'm definitely very interested in cardiomyocytes in particular, which I've also chatted about a lot on this podcast. They're next to adipocytes, I think. They're the next biggest consumer, except adipocytes are staging and pacing them in and out, the fatty acids, you could say. But cardiomyocytes are a big consumer of triglycerides specifically off of lipoproteins. So I'll have to double check this, but I believe it's about 70% of their fuel is triglycerides off of lipoproteins.
Wow. And how are they activated or upregulated?
Well, lipoprotein lipase.
Oh, LP. Okay, so like exercise would help with that.
I mean, the point is, the more the cardiomyocytes are wanting more fuel, presumably whatever their composition is based on availability and how fat adapted you are, is going to be very relevant, right? So there are lectures out there, for example, on humans born with lipoprotein lipase deficiency, and they can see in the scans of their heart how their hearts are different because they're trying to compensate by picking up more glucose. It's very difficult.
Oh, wow.
They've done mouse studies. One of my favorite mouse studies is they can selectively delete lipoprotein lipase expression from cardiomyocytes, and they have rampant heart failure.
Wow.
Because it's a lot of fuel, right? Yeah. Like a triglyceride is. I love these numbers. If you're interested, I like to break down the ATP yield for all of these. It's of course very well known, depending on who you read, that a carbohydrate, you're going to get between like 30, 36 ATP yield. Again, depending on a number of factors. But like, I think a beta hydroxybutyrate is, I want to say like 22.
Wow.
But compare that to a free fatty acid, which granted depends on how many carbon chains there are, but like say palmitic, I think palmitic is like 106, something like that. But the shorthand for a triglyceride is like 460, something like that. And there are 10 to 20,000 triglycerides on a mature VLDL, right? Yeah. So we're talking tankers of potentially millions of ATP yield in these VLDL, and that's a VLDL, not even a chylomicron, right? Of course, I think that's relevant if you're taking steps to lower the availability of them outside of things related to diet or exercise, right? In this chair last, I had Josh Wageman, right? And in his book, he talks about why, he doesn't talk about why, but he mentions how a lot of athletes have a lot of difficulty with being on statins because they seem to have a higher preponderance of the side effects.
Yeah.
Getting back to muscle.
Which it makes sense.
I think that's very relevant.
Yeah.
And again, this isn't an anti-statin thing. It's just hey, can we at least keep on the table all things pro and con? Because I know we're in a paradigm right now where there seems to be just an interest in looking at only the pros. That's the problem.
That is a little annoying to me too. And Yeah, I've heard a lot about that with athletes too, and it makes a lot of, mechanistic sense. When you, have an HMG-CoA inhibitor that's going to, impact also the production of CoQ10, which I believe is, uh, complex 1 and 3, right? In the mitochondria?
I think so.
Yeah,
That area I'm not as
um,
familiar with, but
I
I
might be
know
wrong about that, but yeah, it's obviously, there's some impact in the mitochondria. I think that.
I think there's also a structural one.
Oh, really?
The
What?
ApoB lipoproteins, they're giant, not giant, they're actually small, but they have phospholipids and free cholesterol. And literally going back to Brown and Goldstein's work with the LDL receptor and endocytosis, if a cell needs the same free cholesterol and phospholipids that are part of their lipid biwall, right? Getting back to what I was just talking about with the adipocytes, what about myocytes? What about muscle cells?
Oh, yeah.
Do I
Right.
think muscle cells endocytose ApoB lipoproteins? I absolutely do. I did my own experiment on this, where for 20 days I ate the same thing, walked the same trail, everything. I did everything exactly the same. And then I had 2 interventions. One where I did a massive amount of exercise and then did my blood work right after, and then another where I did a massive amount of exercise, I want to say a few days later. In both cases, you can see this dip in my LDL levels, right? For both of those. Now, I'm not saying it's entirely endocytosis.
Yeah.
But basically what happened was what I hypothesized, which is not only was there an acute drop, but there was a slow coming back up again.
Ramp.
And I would suspect that some amount of that would be endocytosis. And what led me to believe that early on and care about the structural component is there are a bunch of muscle building types from this group called Keto Gains at a time where keto was big, but there were also people who liked to work out a lot. They express less of the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype. They would often have high HDL, low triglycerides, but not high LDL.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I suspect it's because they're quite literally eating them.
Yep.
Their muscle, tissue, and repair is gobbling up a lot more of it, because why wouldn't it? And that leads us back to the whole, if you don't make them more readily accessible, is that going to be a problem?
Right.
And takes me also back to heart failure. Why is there a potentially higher amount of preponderance of heart failure for people who have very low LDL? Could be reverse causality, but it also might not be entirely reverse causality.
Yeah, exactly. It could also be measurement time too, because there's pretty well known dip when they're it's like myocardial infarction. You'll see like a pretty large dip in LDL, like a few days after too. So
yeah, and by the way, I've been vocal on this before, pushing back at the low carb community. That there's that hospital admission study where it showed I want to say 75% had normal or low LDL, right? And I'm like, come on, this is an acute
it's cute
event.
Yeah.
And there's already literature that when you have an MI, you're more likely to have lowered LDL from what your annual exam would have been. So this is not data to. During COVID, there was a study that came out that showed higher severity of symptoms with low LDL, but it was also another hospital admission study.
Right.
And I said then, even when there were some other low carbers who were, a little bit more on the skeptic side of LDL, I said then, this is not useful information for me.
No.
I want to see
if you have
annual
exams.
exams.
It's gonna go down.
Annual exams. Now that's relevant. I want to see that. And that didn't come until I want to say a couple years later.
This is what makes it so hard.
Yes, it does. Well, listen, part of it is that obviously I'm really interested in this topic, and I love having people on like yourself who are more pro LDL lowering to have these kinds of conversations. But the meta is, man, is it polarized out there.
It's so, what really shocks me is, like you said, I've kind of landed more, I would say, like on the conventional side of, I'll be very specific about like residence time.
Yeah.
And then I think from there, I kind of, probably break a little bit and probably more align with, it sounds like, your views on kind of like fuel usage. Um, but I think that no matter where people are on the spectrum, what I find frustrating is there seems to be, I would say, like, not the level of intellectual honesty that I would like, because it is so nuanced. And I just don't feel like people give that enough attention.
I at the time, I should mention this before I say what I'm going to say next. So we're recording this December 18th, 2025. I feel like my own study helped really illustrate that.
Oh, yes,
I mean,
that it did.
it was super fascinating because set aside all of the emotions, everything else in the moment. One thing that really lingered that you may have seen me mention several times by this point is that it was assumed, even though the paper had been published, that we didn't have that much spread, that we were comparing that the lack of association between LDL and ApoB with plaque progression was because everybody had high LDL, right?
Right.
But our standard deviation, right there in table 1, standard deviation for LDL cholesterol in our study was 84.7 milligrams per deciliter.
Jeez.
It's
Yeah.
the largest spread. I can say this with full confidence. The largest spread of LDL cholesterol in any imaging study ever done. Hands down.
Yeah, with SD of that, yeah, it's not surprising at all.
But I went to a lot of the folks who were critical of the study. And as you know, I myself have acknowledged where there are some things that could have been done better.
That's every study, by the way.
It is every study. And I don't want to say this in a whining way, but I kind of knew we'd be sort of held to different standards.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at least happy personally for, my standard of, oh, hey, there's a thing. Let's not double down or anything like that. Let's just concede it, put that part behind. But what did surprise me about this process was I'd cultivated many great relationships with people who were, let's just say, more pro-LDL lowering in general, who I would bring this to their attention politely, as I would say, okay, you're kind of telling half of what's going on. You're leaving out the other half, which kind of creates this picture. And definitely one of those is you're making it sound as though there's only high levels of LDL in a narrow band. But we have such a spread that it absolutely fits right into what the lipid hypothesis should be testing.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely fair to say, so for example, another example was the pre-specified endpoint.
That's the one that really got me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pre-specified endpoint was, and it could have been funny if the paper had just been corrected, because then I could have just said, oh yeah, whoops, I thought this was in table 3. I literally texted that on April 8th, the day after, to one of the co-authors who brought that to my attention. I said back to him in the text, I said, oh no, it's in table 3. And I went to look myself and I was like, oh, it's not.
It's
okay.
not. Yeah.
But for the folks who were bringing that up fairly, because if that was in the pre-registered endpoint from like 5 years earlier, even if it was a mostly different team at that time, it was something that should have been numerically in our paper, even if that wasn't, figure 1A or whatever. However, at the same time, the pre-registered methodology was Q-angio.
Mm-hmm.
So this paper that was getting published could have accurately been considered a sub-analysis before getting to the final analysis, which would ultimately get published, which is, by the way, under submission right now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, but I brought that up again to the same friendly critics. I was like, okay, knock us on the things that you feel are knockable, but you do realize that when you're only bringing this up, it paints us in this picture.
Yeah.
That you also know me well enough to know that that's not accurate, especially when I'm bringing to you the other half of the things that you're not sharing, right? But I do feel like it became a kind of construct. And I talked to Alex Leaf in an episode that hasn't been aired yet. It kind of got a life of its own.
It did.
It really did.
I was really surprised by it.
It did. And it was kind of a maturing moment for me on this actual hypothesis itself and how it connects back to our study. It was too enticing of a narrative that, keto-funded study accidentally proves the lipid hypothesis.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's a fun idea that kind of became it's after there was an engineer who kind of put it to me pretty early on. He's like, you've got to quit thinking that you're the target audience to these videos and so forth. It's each other. There's a preaching to the choir component that is very synergistic right now. And they were right. And so I waited until we had HeartFlow data out. And then even then, I didn't tell anybody to even talk about HeartFlow until we had Q-Angio out.
Mm-hmm.
I was happy that we had multiple analyses to finally get back to talking about it. And then nothing. There's been absolute quiet everywhere, right? Like there couldn't be enough discussion daily on our study when there was only the Clearly data set.
Yeah.
But then when HeartFlow and Q-Angio came out and they were agreeing with each other and Clearly was standing out more and more on its own for, reasons we might get into, it became a subject nobody wanted to talk about anymore.
Yeah.
And
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, which brings me back to the whole intellectual honesty thing, right? Like I don't know. I am not as spicy as many of my colleagues. but it's an interesting larger meta data set now, and really kind of illustrated for me, scientist me, not just engineer me, but scientist me, as to the landscape that we're in.
Yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
if there's a single study that demonstrates that principle, that's the one.
I'm writing a book on this, by the way, and I can chart 4 distinct cycles. When I'm first coming onto the scene and I'm identifying lean mass hyperresponders before the study had started, I identified the phenotype in 2017 coming into 2019. And so is there a lot of social media activity where we're discussing it? Yes. And bar none, everybody who's pro LDL lowering is like, it doesn't matter. These guys are high risk. You can't have somebody walking around with a 300, 400 LDL. They're going to have a heart attack. It's happening right now. They need to take action right now to lower their LDL. I get the funding for the study, and suddenly there's a shift. Well, this isn't going to tell us anything. I mean, there's not this.
Yeah.
They're only going to be 2 years at baseline because that's the eligibility, plus 1 year. Like, that's not going to tell us. It takes decades to develop atherosclerosis, right? And imaging technology is not that great. Needs to be events. There needs to be, and by events, for those uninitiated, we're talking actual like heart attacks and so forth, right? That's going to take forever. That's going to take a long time. Can't expect plaque to show up in imaging. It's still a new technology. Only events would be considered quality data, right? So that's cycle 2. April 7th paper comes out with the Clearly data. Now everybody, everybody is totally signed on to imaging. There's all these interesting, I kept receipts. There's a whole bunch of tweets where people are like, they prove the lipid hypothesis unequivocally. Lean mass hyperresponders are the highest risk population. They look like, diabetic populations and so forth, right? That cycle, and at that time, even before my PHC conference, I was sharing privately, I'm concerned about the Clearly data set though, but I can't see it until I get the raw data myself.
What was concerning?
Well, what we published on April 7th was where the 2 data sets agreed. And by that, I mean, there's the semi-quantitative analysis, and then there's the quantitative analysis. And the quantitative was, in this case, Clearly. They were the second one that got done.
Mhm.
So the semi-quantitative is, I say this lovingly, is more the horseshoes and hand grenades version. It's
Mhm.
where expert cardiologist readers are blinded, but they're going through 15 pre-specified places in the coronary arteries that are susceptible to plaque relative to other places.
Okay.
And they score it from 0 to 3, 0 being no detectable plaque, up to 3 being severe. And most of our participants had a 0. Some had a little bit, a 1 in all of their coronary arteries. One place had like some plaque. And then some at the far end of the curve, I want to say like 10, 12, something like that, had numbers with, I want to say 6 that would be considered rapid progressors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But 6 of them were regressors, actually had
Were
lower
those the
plaque
same
in the
6?
second scan. Yeah, and this
Wow.
is in the semi-quantitative. So we're super excited.
Yeah.
Clearly comes in. I'm seeing it about a year and 4 months ago, 5 months ago. And there were 3 areas, 2 of them that they agreed on, 1 that they didn't. The 2 areas they agreed on was A, those people who had plaque at baseline were more likely to have had progression.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't be too surprising, but this was good data because this is the first time where you saw it in a metabolically healthy population longitudinally. Greg, they don't do longitudinal data on healthy populations for CT angiograms, which is cuckoo bananas to me. I just have to fit that
bananas.
in. Yeah. Why are we the first ones doing this? This is crazy. Okay. But the second thing is there's no association between LDL and ApoB with either the semi-quantitative analysis or the Clearly analysis.
There's no association?
There's no association at all. No.
Wow.
Between whatever your levels of LDL and ApoB. And I mean at baseline and also at follow-up.
Was this LDL-C?
Yeah, LDL cholesterol and ApoB.
That's really fascinating because, those are thought to be, mostly concordant, right?
Correct. Yeah. No, sorry. Just to be sure. I don't mean that there's non-association between LDL cholesterol and ApoB. I mean those 2 markers and progression of plaque.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So there's no association there.
Okay.
Now, where they didn't agree was what I was bringing up a year and 4 months ago, which is the plaque progression in the Clearly analysis was higher than what it was in the semi-quantitative analysis.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and I brought this up at the time, I said, this actually seems too high at a cohort level for what seems biologically possible.
Why were those 2 disagreeing so much?
That's what I wanted to know. But the problem was, I'm the funder.
Right.
I'm properly blinded from the data, which is another way of saying, for those uninitiated, I don't have access to the raw anonymized data, even the anonymized data, because I shouldn't.
That's right.
Because I can control the checks.
Mm-hmm.
So I brought this up with the team. I said, this seems wrong. I would expect these to be more concordant. They are in other studies. In other studies, the semi-quantitative and the quantitative, even though Clearly is the first of the ones that are ahead, I would expect these to be concordant with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they said 3 things, and they were decent points. One of them was, well, first of all, it's a heterogeneous population. So getting back to some being rapid progressors, they're absorbing more of that rapid progression relative to the rest of the population. That's why there's some heavy progressors in the Clearly data set. The next one was, well, there's another problem, which is that because the plaque levels are so low overall, it allows for there to be a bigger difference between these 2, because it's, again, back to the absolute number being low, but the relative having greater noise.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But then there was this other issue, which is that even if I had a problem, and even if I could stop things there, what would I do if I was looking at this from the outside, would I be okay with a funder going, this seems too high for me. It doesn't make sense to me. Therefore, you should stop this. Keep reworking the data until it makes sense to me. No, of course you cannot do that.
No.
Right? Now, that said, I did know at the point that it was going to get published, I would get access to the raw data, because that's the contract. Is once it's published, then of course that part of it's over. I can actually see it myself. Right. So I knew after April 7th I would see that data. April 7th rolls around. We had the social media rollout that I think could have been better, is my polite way of putting it. But another thing that was a bit of a source of frustration, which I alluded to earlier, was that every paper I've ever done, and pretty much every paper I've ever known anybody's ever done, when it gets published, things get identified that need correcting. Sometimes it is, a series of typos, or this graph should have said this, or so forth.
Always. So
you take that back to the publisher and you say, yeah, can we make this change and this change? So quite literally, the moment it was identified that no, this numeric label isn't there, and this is something that was registered from 5 years earlier, you guys should have this in there. I agreed. And I was like, yeah, let's get that in there. No, spoiler alert, it is corrected now.
Oh, it is?
It just didn't happen right away.
Okay.
So while it didn't happen right away, I could understand why a lot of people were coming to a conclusion that there was a problem, save my then going out and saying, yeah, the critics were right. Like I just straight up said, we should have had this numerical label in there. We have to, do this through letters to the editor, responses. I don't love that, but the journal's prerogative, they can do what they want.
Sure.
Yeah.
Their decision.
But
at least it's getting corrected one way or another. Even if it is through a letter to the editor, there's transparency there.
But Greg, I have to tell you something. You've never seen a video that talks about how we publish this that includes my owning the mistake.
No.
And acknowledging this up front.
No, I think I remember telling you that I wanted to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why haven't you seen a video like that? It happened within a very short time after it occurred. Well,
not only that, but I can't remember seeing a post on it either.
Oh, a post on me acknowledging that there was...
like outside of you.
Yes,
that was not like... When there were people criticizing it, I don't remember that ever coming up once.
Right. And this is what's funny, is at the time, a number of the teams I was working with behind the scenes were, and I don't think for necessarily nefarious reasons, but they were saying, don't apologize. Don't give critics anything, what it was. And I was like, okay, but it's a legitimate mistake.
Yeah.
Like,
why would you not?
And even however much it was my mistake or not, I'm the spearheader of this study. And I, again, getting back to what would I want? What would I expect of other scientists, right? I have always been of the mind that science is all about not just getting data, but you make mistakes along the way.
That's kind of the whole point, isn't
right?
it?
And so it's fine. You embrace it. You call it out. You call it out when I can't call out other people for making mistakes if I can't call out myself for making mistakes, right? And so, yeah, I did that. Getting back to the intellectual honesty, wow. I would have thought anybody who was covering our research would have said, oh, you know what? They made this mistake. Even if they were capitalizing of like, how embarrassing that they made this mistake and they missed this label thing. Rather, it kept perpetuating this deception narrative that no, they did this and they know what they were doing, and never mentioned me and my actual acknowledgement of the issue. Again, it's one thing if it's the people I know are just, going all out in any way that they can to attack the study.
There are going to be some people like that.
But there were a number of people who I thought would be fully reporting on every aspect of what was the data in front of them, which included how everything developed. And again, I don't want to make it sound as if this is a complaint so much as a recognition from a from an observation of this natural experiment as to how entrenched that narrative became.
Yeah, that
It's
was what was really
incredible.
surprising to me,
Yeah,
because it became entrenched and, like, quickly too,
it did.
really quickly, and it just seemed to have catch a little momentum and then just maintained it, and, gosh, I would love to go back and try to figure out, like, why that was, because, it could be there are probably, a small number of people that may have known it and, kind of promoted the wrong version of events. But I would also think that, you know, a lot of it could just be subconscious from just biases. I don't know which one it is or what the distribution is.
I think here's my most, I don't know if I want to call it the most generous take,
Yeah.
but I always I always try to be the most gracious I can to even my fiercest of critics. I can't say I pull it off 100% of the time, but I try. I think that you probably heard the term the noble lie.
Mhm.
So the thinking behind this is, look, it's, I know what I'm doing is deceptive or even just outright perpetuating something that's false, but it's for a good
It's for a
cause.
good cause.
It's
Yeah.
I'm helping people because there were a number of folks who, before the April 7th paper was published, were concerned that our study was going to give false comfort to people who have high LDL. That lean mass hyperresponders, that even choosing lean mass hyperresponders was a way of putting our thumb on the scale so that it could be claimed that LDL was not a problem. And
Mm.
therefore, treatment for people who have high LDL but are at high risk was, going to be capitalized. It was going to derail treatment, to that extent. But again, the challenge for me was there were some people who I knew directly, who I could DM, who I could add, and I would bring these things forward.
And they still kept doing it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was surreal because people I'd known for years. And I just think that there's something distinct about cholesterol in particular. I really do. I think that there's it's kind of a carve out for this particular area. And I always go back to this one story. I'm not even sure if I told this on the podcast before, but I'll just repeat it here. There was a doctor, oh gosh, this was 2019, actually, just before. I remember this was just before I launched Citizen Science Foundation. I'd had 4 or 5 conversations with him, good long conversations, and older gentleman, but really kind-hearted, great guy, absolutely became a doctor to heal people. And we were having a really good heart-to-heart discussion. And at one point he goes, I really think, Dave, you might be right. But I hope you don't take it personally if I say I'm rooting for you to be wrong.
Mm.
And I was,
Really?
it's like, why would you say it?
It took me a moment to parse that.
Right. Wouldn't you want lean mass hyperresponders to turn out to be generally at low risk? And he goes, you don't realize as a clinician that LDL is always an easy win for me in
Mm.
my new patients. Somebody comes in and they have an LDL of 140 and we get them on a statin and it gets it down to under 100 by like the next visit. And that's a win. That's like now he can feel good and the patient can feel good that they've extended his life. And when he shared it that way, like a big light bulb like clicked, and it also made it more obvious to me at that time why it's one thing to debate LDL's causality to cardiovascular disease. Weirdly, there's a much more fervent anger at discussion on whether or not people should have statins, for example, because now you're stepping into the territory of the treatment that's being prescribed, usually something that doesn't just have years, but potentially decades of recommendations behind it. So now you're Now it's really personal to
Right.
the doctor's relationship with their patients. And that's why I think there's a greater visceral reaction to not just those kinds of discussions and the chance that it can, disrupt things,
Right.
but also to the prospect of there being a study with people who have sky high LDL and population-wide don't turn out to be high risk.
Yeah, that's the part that I have trouble understanding. 'Cause isn't that just like one of the more interesting scientific questions you could ask?
Yes! Yes, Greg, yes!
I mean, like, wouldn't like a lipidologist or kind of any MD want to say, hey, what about people with really high LDL where you may not see this happen? Wouldn't and you're going to get imaging for all of them.
Yeah.
Like, I think that if people didn't know the outcome, I would guess that a very, very high percentage of people would say, yeah, I want to see that. And they might say that because they assume they know the outcome and it would, confirm their beliefs. But I think it's interesting to look at when it's published and it disagrees with their beliefs, that there's a very different reaction.
That's why, in a roundabout way, there's a sort of silver lining to this Clearly data set. There's things I know that I can't talk about yet as to why my confidence level in that data set is now lower than ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's processes behind the scenes that I can't discuss yet,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'll just say that there already were a lot of signs that I was pointing to. It was so strange because in pointing to those signs, again, talking with super experts, PhDs, and all sorts of folks saying there's no imaging data set ever in any study outside of ours that didn't have regressors. If for no other reason, then there's some amount of noise below the noise floor. So if you have low plaque, the odds that the next scan is going to always have higher plaque, even if it's a low change, doesn't make any sense to me as an engineer.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You should see a wobble
You should.
at the lowest levels because that's where the noise is.
Yeah. It's not as sensitive down there.
Right. So, yeah, for the same reason that I could have a bag of 1,000 marbles and another bag of 1,001 marbles and go to a bathroom scale, weigh them both over and over again.
They'll likely be the same on a bathroom scale.
Yeah. Or sometimes the
Yeah.
one with the 1,001 marbles is going to be lower.
Yeah.
Because the device is going to have an error range.
That's right.
It's probably 1/4 of a pound. And so, of course, so that's why the first time Clearly came back, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is there 100% that do not have any regression? Especially since every study outside of this does.
Yeah.
And now with 3 other analyses with the Q-angio and HeartFlow, yeah, they all have regression. All of them have regression in it. And I'm intellectually honest enough to say I don't know how much below the noise floor those actually are regressors. For the same reason, I don't know how many of them are progressors.
Right.
It's not a bad thing.
It's the same problem.
Right. And it's not a bad thing to say, hey, this down here that's so low is so low that we can't conclude things confidently. But also, by the way, that's where I'd want my heart to be.
Yeah.
I want my heart to have longitudinal scans.
Exactly.
That they're so low we can't even tell if there's progression or regression. I want that. That's great, right?
Yeah, that's a huge win.
Yeah. But again, these sorts of things, I feel like my engineer friends caught right away.
Yeah.
Like they got that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I also thought when we put the data out, everybody else would see it too. Like I thought everybody would go, oh, yeah, now that I'm doing some digging, there aren't any other studies like this. But getting back to the lipid hypothesis, I think, I hate to put it this way, I think the lipid hypothesis is so strong that when people go, oh, but it's an untreated population, that even in the error range of resolution capability of a device, you go, so it makes sense that they're all up. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah.
Ah, it's
And that
been a
is the thing is like the response to the study like exposed kind of like all of that. You could kind of see people's thinking laid bare.
yeah. But this again, getting back to the full loop, we're now to the other side of it where a lot of these same people who were communicating, who are making videos, who are making posts, who are writing articles, they now have more data since then. If
And
if they've changed their minds, share that. If they haven't changed their minds, share why.
right.
It wasn't too long ago that everybody wanted to talk about our study.
Yeah. Why aren't there follow-ups?
Yeah, now it's quiet.
Yeah.
Now there's a stillness in the
I
air.
mean that really is the hallmark of a good scientist is how willing they are to change their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, given new data. At least that's what I believe.
Yeah, and so here we are. It's kind of crazy. It's coming up to the end of the year. Uh, current the current manuscript is in the works. There have been, like I said, there's been some things behind the scenes that will be in the book that will make for. I'm telling you, it's going to be an interesting book. I'm only talking about, I want to say 10% of what I can talk about, but a
Mm,
lot of the inside story is really fascinating.
is it?
Yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah.
Going back
So,
to your clinician. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
Maybe going back to your clinician. Um, you were mentioning that a lot of the clinicians were kind of worried that their big win would be taken away. But in a lot of ways, looking at the study, wouldn't they have potentially a bigger big win? Um, to just say, hey, look, if you get metabolically healthy like these people, it may be less of an issue.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. Listen, I'll bet you'll agree with me on this. LDL gets way more attention than metabolic health.
Yeah, and
For
like
cardiovascular disease risk, not even just for all cause mortality or looking better or anything, specifically for heart health.
yeah, and it's not even the biggest risk factor. Not, I mean,
Not by a long shot.
no,
You can fully believe in the lipid hypothesis, but still acknowledge
yes,
that it's pretty low on the list relative to what you should be doing about your insulin resistance.
yeah, that's number. I think it's if I recall correctly, it's like 10x the risk factor, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think it's at least 8 in the women's heart study, I want to say.
yeah. So
8.
almost an order of magnitude.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's fascinating to me because I get it. There's just something. This is what I think is another factor. Is I think that people like simple problems for which there's simple solutions to.
hmm,
And there's a gravitational pull to that. And once you feel like, oh, this just gets back to the doctor I was talking about. Once you feel like, oh, got it. There really is this like euphoria to it. Like, good. Now I'm not going to have to be concerned about that.
right.
And that's also a source of my major frustration. In my family, there are some family members. Actually, I should extend this out to my friends. I have 2 friends in particular from the state I grew up in who are just convinced that they're heart attack proof because they've gotten their LDL low enough.
Mm,
And their doctor basically is giving them that impression, is that they're not worried at all about them having a heart attack. One of these friends has 4 of the 5 criteria for metabolic syndrome. The other has 5 of 5. Solid. And one of them, I've literally brought them studies. So please, just please look at this. And they don't. They feel very confident that they're set there. And from their perspective, it's just the other things related to symptoms of metabolic syndrome that are inconvenient, but at least they're not at risk of dying from a heart attack. They're more
gosh.
worried about, say, cancer or something
Kind
like
of back
that.
to your public health message when you were saying people were worried that um, a study showing higher LDL, but like no plaque progression in some cases, and then worried about that sending the wrong public health message. I think that's really interesting because isn't it sending a stronger public health message in a lot of ways about something that is an order of magnitude higher risk factor, which is like metabolic health.
Yeah. I'll take it a step further. There are certainly a lot of people in the low carb space who I think if they were me, if they were spearheading this study, particularly after having QANG and heart flow in hand, would be like, well, lipid hypothesis is now dead, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be it. I think this is a groundbreaking study. I'm super thankful for all my research partners, but just as fast as we were getting the baseline data in, and it was giving me confidence that our data was going to look good, I started raising money for a second study. If I really thought this was going to be the end of the story, why would I bother going through all of this again
Right.
for a second study? Because science is built on replication.
That's right.
Because I can't make the claim that this one study ends all discussion on the lipid hypothesis. Again, I think a good scientist wouldn't. But do I think it definitely throws enormous data against the simplistic version of the lipid hypothesis, that all populations who have high LDL at a population level are therefore at high risk. Actually, yeah, that's putting some data behind it. But if a skeptic was to come to me and say, and therefore LDL doesn't matter for any population, no, we can't. This is not a question this one was helping to address. And just as well as I can't say for those who did turn out to be rapid progressors, even if there was no association between LDL and ApoB, can I say a change after the fact of their LDL and ApoB wouldn't prove to be beneficial? No, we don't answer that question either, right? Now, to be fair, neither does really any other study that I've seen. I haven't seen any study on people with high LDL who do not have other like insulin resistance or are inflamed or anything. There's just no primary prevention studies on people who are metabolically healthy with lipid lowering. I wish that there were. I'd like to know what that looks like, but that hasn't been answered either.
Nope. Yeah. This topic gets so nuanced so fast.
It does.
And I think the other thing that's interesting too is, it's possible to hold, two things being true, I think, at once, which is unquestionably insulin resistance is by far the bigger risk factor. And, LDL could still play a role in that. Just not as much of a risk factor. That's what I believe.
Right. Well, and that's what I try to say in a way of bringing us all together.
Yeah.
Even if there are many folks who follow my work, and I myself try not to take a direct position on it, who are skeptical of LDL's association or causality independently. And there are some who are. We all have to agree on metabolic health being relevant for cardiovascular disease.
That should be totally non-controversial.
Yeah, that should be the easy one. But people don't want to make videos on that as much. They don't want to, write articles on it as much. At least it's getting more attention lately. I'm appreciating that. But don't feel a lipid marker is going to make you bulletproof. It's just not going to happen.
Nope.
So
no, far from.
I want to get into a couple other things.
Yeah.
Though I'm glad we got to cover lipids real quick.
Me too.
One thing you mentioned in another podcast was your potassium intake.
Oh yeah, potassium.
Yeah. Now, have you caught any of what I've talked about with salt? Do you know what my salt intake is?
You were telling me the other day. I remember it's quite high.
It is.
From what I recall.
And many folks have said I need to be matching that with potassium. Would that be your opinion? You should actually, if you've got a lot of sodium in your diet,
probably at a minimum. But I remember you telling me that it's like totally the opposite. I mean, yeah. I remember being really high. It was like over 7 grams, right?
Of salt? Yeah, I again, to distinguish, salt is, 40% sodium, roughly 60% sodium chloride. 60% chloride. So in reality, probably my actual sodium levels itself exceeds 4 grams a day.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So the quick story, and I'm sorry for anybody who's already heard this before on the podcast, but I'll try to give you the elevator pitch. I, in 2018, after being keto for a while, I kept dealing with electrolyte issues. I knew it was electrolyte related. I kept getting Charlie horses and my feet would get cramped, but I'd also have other things like lightheadedness and sometimes being lethargic and just a whole pinwheel of things. And I kept playing with magnesium and potassium and then trying some other minerals, trying to get like sports salts, trying to, play around more with pink salt and so forth. But mostly focusing on non-salt specific minerals because I kept ruling out salt. I kept thinking, no, I have plenty of salt.
How much were you getting at the time? Do you remember?
If I had to guess how much was just on my food, it probably, salt-wise, probably was maybe 3 grams, 4 grams of salt. Therefore, let's say 1.4, of sodium, something like that. And then I got introduced to an article that suggested fructose malabsorption, which I knew I'd had from years earlier when I wasn't even in nutrition, but I found out it was a thing, might be related to a lack of mineral uptake and in particular sodium. So it could be a lack of absorption in my gut to get enough. And therefore, maybe I should consider upping my salt intake. But I kept going, but I already have so much salt. All right, fine. For 2 weeks, I'm just going to literally supplement salt. So I frosted my food in salt. And then I also had salt tablets in addition to it. And all my electrolyte issues went away. All of them. It was just salt. It wasn't any addition of any other electrolyte.
Wow.
So
how much potassium were you getting at the time?
You probably being a lot more familiar than most, I liked burger patties. They're pretty decent on potassium. And for a little while, as a way to supplement potassium, and this is a nice little hack for people, I used Morton's light salt.
Oh, yeah.
Potassium chloride.
Right.
Because, for those who don't know, I think the law still applies. If you have potassium in a supplement form, they limit it to 99
grams or
micrograms. Yeah, which is hardly anything.
Nothing.
You might as well get it from food or from Morton's light salt because you're not going to get anywhere close to enough. Like you'd have to take those down like crazy. If I were to guess, because I know I'm only getting it through food now, if I were to just take a wild guess, maybe 2 grams a day, maybe 3. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I'm definitely in excess of 4 grams of sodium a day when I'm fully keto. So the one footnote to this whole thing is, if I'm very, very low carb, I need to supplement more salt. If I'm higher carb, if I'm either a keto or if I'm on vacation, I'm not doing as good with my diet, then the need for the supplementation is lower.
Interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah. You, on the other hand, sound like you're aiming right for the potassium. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. And I think this is where the N=1 becomes really interesting too, because, the studies are only going to show us, averages and medians and things like that. But N=1 is where the rubber hits the road. And you can read a study and see what's going to happen in the population, but you can N=1 and see what makes you feel better. And, this is going to be different for everyone.
Yeah. And this one in particular, a lot of people have written to me or reached out to me since sharing this story who found success in the same way. But it is absolutely heterogeneous. I want to say I'm part of a small fraction of the total community when going really low carb that sees a huge benefit, but a sizable enough fraction that they come out. I have a good friend in Amber Hearn. You probably heard of her with the carnivore diet. Yeah. She's an advocate of the opposite. Don't add salt. Adding salt is usually not indicated for her. And my colleague Siobhan Huggins also does better when not adding salt.
Yeah.
So it's different.
When I was growing up, my mom would always like try to keep her salt low. And I started realizing that when I had higher levels of salt, I would just not feel good. I'd start kind of feeling like a little fatigued, a little tired. And I've noticed that like replicating. And, I started thinking about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what my mom was saying, the entire time when I was growing up. She was kind of pounding in our heads.
Obviously, how much you're drinking is huge relevance because it follows, what's the saying? Salt follows water, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I do tend to drink a lot. I drank a lot just during this podcast interview. So that might be relevant also for like further excretion. But
Right.
it's so true that it does seem to be, of things that I've ran into with diet, seems to be one of the most individualized.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no getting around this component, which is essential minerals are in fact essential minerals. So
Yes.
you cannot make them inside the body. You need to
No.
get them from outside the body.
No.
So if you are low on electrolyte, you want to become aware of that, because that is a big problem if you're not getting enough of it.
Yeah. There are some hypotheses that in ancestral populations, have you seen this? That subsistence populations or hunter-gatherers in the past would get like up to 10 grams of potassium per day. I'm not sure if you've seen those. But yeah,
what's the primary source of the?
It's mostly like just plants, kind of plants in general. And then I think, in like even in the Messiah, they will get some, but it's mostly from fermented milk in the Messiah. So you see in most subsistence populations, like quite a bit of potassium. And what I've always thought is interesting, and this could be a bias, but if you just look at how our body is kind of designed, with RAS. So that's gosh, why can't I remember what it stands for now? But
do you mean ROS, right?
ROS.
Oh, yeah, reactive oxygen species.
Oh no, the RAAS.
That one I don't know.
But basically, our bodies are kind of designed to hold on to salt like we'll never see it again.
Right.
But the same isn't true for potassium. Potassium, it's like pretty easily excreted.
That's part of what that paper was talking about, or basically that sodium is like the trunk of the tree, in that if your sodium levels are getting low in the body, there's a way by which it can retain it better by ditching the other electrolytes. And that's why, which is presumably why it was that I kept feeling symptoms related to having low potassium or low magnesium, but I needed to supplement salt to get back to sufficiency there such that it wouldn't keep ditching those. Because I did get some cessation of symptoms when I did supplement both of those a lot more. It just, it never cleared it entirely.
Gotcha. So your floor is just higher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what it seemed, and that's how it seemed to play out anecdotally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So,
but yeah, salt, literally the word salary.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up actually.
Yeah, it comes from, that was a form of currency.
That's how people were paid.
Yeah, they had salt. Salary means salt in some language, maybe Latin or Greek or something. But that, you got a salt supply and it was a commodity.
Mm-hmm. Or worth his salt, worth her salt.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Worth his weight in salt.
It's funny how that's just like embedded in our language even. But yeah, it used to be, pretty hard to come by. So I do think there's kind of some evidence just in seeing how the body, selectively adapted over time, that potassium may be needed in higher quantities. But I think just from personal experience, I just feel so much better when I have, probably like 3 times potassium to sodium, around there, around 2 to 3.
But you don't actually, I think I heard on another podcast you don't actually supplement it. You just know you get it from food.
I just try to get it from food.
What foods are you getting it from?
Bananas, avocados, and like Great Northern beans are my three favorite. Um, those are like the highest, and then coconut water. Those are kind of like my four that I just go to. And I know that if I like try to eat something high in potassium with every meal, I'll kind of hit it. I'll get close. So if I have a banana or like half an avocado, with each meal, that'll probably get me to 3 or 4, a cup of Great Northern beans, little coconut water, and I'm hitting 5 or 6.
What's your diet composition like in general?
Like macro wise, I try to get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And then because of ApoE4, I do try to like keep saturated fat down, maybe like 7% of total calories. I don't try to go over that. It seems to be like the threshold that I see kind of increase. So usually around like 60 grams of fat or so, and the remainder just kind of like carbs. And that'll usually be like complex carbs, either from vegetables, potatoes, sweet potatoes, things like that.
You eat a lot of salads?
I don't eat too many salads, for whatever reason. And I think usually I like to cook ahead a lot and just kind of prepare things so I don't have to think about it. And for whatever reason, salads, the greens wilt in the fridge.
Yeah, and
they just wilt so fast.
They can take a little bit of work.
Yeah, they do. So, but yeah, my diet's actually pretty simple. Oats too. Oats, I get quite a few of, and then I try to get, probably between 38 and 50 grams of soluble fiber. You're right around there, and I've just noticed that seems to work well for me.
What got you into targeting that? It sounds like it's very deliberate that you're trying to hit to that level of.
Yeah, it was a lot of research that I'd done, because I think that a lot of people have this perception of fiber that it's just roughage, and that the only thing that it's going to really help you with is excretion. But what interests me about it is saturated short chain fatty acid signaling. And so this would be, through things like HDAC, which for those who don't know, kind of influences your gut lining. So if HDAC is not inhibited, your gut lining will kind of start to come apart. Your tight junctions will become less tight. If HDAC is inhibited, it'll be the opposite. And then also, I think another couple things that are probably pretty relevant are FFAR2 and FFAR3. And so those are going to signal things like GLP-1, which is really, obviously a hot topic, and PKK, things like that. And it just turns out that, you need kind of a certain amount of short chain fatty acids to get there. And what I noticed was I was reading some studies, and what really got me interested in it was realizing how fast your microbiome can change. So if you move from like a pretty high, I almost think that we shouldn't even call it fiber. We should probably call it short chain fatty acids, because I think that's more specific. That's kind of the end goal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, because you might be losing some people in this, the short chain fatty acids are the net product, right?
That's right.
So
yeah,
what you're referring to is in the gut microbiome, you've got the gut bugs. We'll just keep it colloquial. But they are doing this converting.
Yeah,
so they're converting fiber, right, into the short chain fatty acids. Not all in every case, but that's where a good source of the existing fatty acids that we're absorbing in the gut are coming from.
That's right. Yeah, and there are kind of few other ways to get it there, other than through fermentation. Fermentation of mostly like soluble fiber,
Do you think there's something to carnivores not getting fiber being problematic?
Yes, although it's probably going to take a long time. Um, if you kind of look at the two states of the microbiome, kind of like with fiber and without, I think we're meant to be in both states. It's just how long you stay in another state is kind of like my question. And so if you think about it just from a very basic theoretical ancestral lens, there would be times when there'd be a lot of available soluble fiber. And during those times, you would have access to a lot of it. And then they're going to be kind of like the winters where you may not have access to that. And we can do well in both conditions. But I think the question is, to me, and there hasn't been a lot of research on this, is how long is it kind of like safe or optimal to stay in the condition where it's, pretty low short chain fatty acid. Because what can happen is you kind of have the two states. It's kind of proteolytic, or sorry, yeah, proteolytic, which is going to be, instead of fermenting soluble fiber, you'll be fermenting more proteins. And what happens when you can do that is there can be some byproducts of that are not the most favorable. So things like higher ammonia, precresol. There's another one too that I'm kind of forgetting the name of, which maybe when we take a break, I'll come back. I'll take a look at that. But so I guess the question is really the byproducts, and then HDAC and kind of immunity, lack of HDAC inhibition, and immune suppression. Or actually, in the case of like low fiber, you have more immune activation, which makes a little bit of logical sense when you think about it. Because if you're in a period where you don't have, or let's say that it's winter, there are not a lot of plants, there's not a lot of available soluble fiber. What are the things that you're going to want to do? You may want immunity to go up because you may encounter some less than favorable food that you may need to eat just to survive. You're not going to have a lot of soluble fiber. And so I think one of the reasons your gut junctions, start to loosen is because your gut needs some form of butyrate. And so it's going to use the mucin in your gut lining in order to ferment that butyrate. And you're probably going to want your glucose or your insulin sensitivity to change a little bit too, because glucose is in short supply potentially. So there may be a logical argument why these things might occur, but I think that the biggest thing for me is just those byproducts and how harmful are those longer term.
This seems very, pretty much already getting tested to some degree. If there's a number of carnivores, people who are on a diet that's entirely meat-based,
Mm-hmm.
in theory, we should be able to test ammonia levels.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you should be.
And it shouldn't take long. It should actually be something that would be, per the hypothesis you're suggesting,
Yeah.
it should be something that should actually be picked up pretty quickly.
It should be. Yeah.
I'm more of the school of thought that there's some degree of nutrient sufficiency that is difficult for us to fully pin down because of how adaptive we are as humans. Like, for example, if you're fully fat adapted, if you're on a ketogenic diet, you're going to protein itself, your complement of amino acids are going to be different than the demand for them because of what enzymes they're making at what proportions, because of what you're doing inside the cytosol of the cells. They're all changing based, their needs are different. than if you're on a mixed diet or if you're on a higher carb, higher fiber diet, right? The hitting those sufficiency levels, though, can be relevant towards disease outcomes. If you're low in particular things, particularly if you're not able to crave it in a more distinctive way, or for whatever reason you're restricted from being able to have access to it anyway, given the nature of your circumstances. Again, fascinating thing about us as humans is we're actually still pretty adaptive, to where there's people who will still live on food you wouldn't even consider real food for a surprisingly long amount of time. Right?
I mean, it's one of the most amazing things to me. I mean, if you think about how far we've made it as a species under just like the least favorable conditions.
Yeah. A lot of times, terrible conditions we've engineered.
Yes, exactly.
We are, it's almost a little dystopian how much we've created, concrete empire that we're in, the food-like substances that we now ingest, and that we have whole companies that have teams whose job it is to make it as addictive as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's how they'll advance towards better lives for themselves personally, right?
We've come full circle.
Yeah, but at the same time, what I like is you personally are an inspiring story of, you mentioned you started at 47. Did you start at 47 to transform?
Yeah, at 47.
Yeah, at 47. So 47 years old, when a lot of people likely would go, listen, this is just how I am. This is just who I am. I don't see myself changing my habits and my behavior. You're yet one more example that, no, you really can. At nearly half a century old, you can become a different person.
Yeah. And pretty quickly too.
Right. And what I like to say to other people, because it's just one life lesson I seem to have to keep relearning myself, but hold to as tight as I can, is that we're not used to thinking in terms of momentum. If you have a workout, you're like, God, I can't do this every day. This is too much. You have to recognize that's the first workout. It isn't going to be like that every day.
No.
And if you trust more in momentum, you'll realize that the things that get easier get more enjoyable to do because they're easier.
Yes.
By the same token, we have momentum in the other direction. You've been on a great diet. You decide you're going to go ahead and cheat, but you're only going to cheat just this once. And you don't realize how much you can shift the momentum again.
Oh, yeah.
Toward the worse.
Yeah. It's like a flywheel that can change directions like instantly.
Yeah. But keeping that in mind, that there is such a thing as momentum, I think it's crucial in order for you to make major structural changes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, just if you are going to be making major structural changes, it's really hard to do all at once. So picking very, very small things to do. And I think we were mentioning earlier, hoping that they can make you feel better. Just trusting in yourself that you did them. Having faith that you could follow through on something that you said that you're going to do, even if it's 5 minutes, because it's that loop that you want to optimize for.
Right.
And not those end outcomes. Those end outcomes will come. But if you can optimize for that, momentum loop.
There's this other saying that I also try to keep in the center of my mind, which is, I think it was actually Woody Allen. 90% of everything is just showing up.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes. I love Woody Allen quotes. I think he had one on longevity too. That's one of my favorites. And he said, people want to live forever, but they don't know what to do with a Sunday afternoon.
Just because we're talking quotes, here's another one I said from earlier that I really liked with the team I was talking to. And it's because there was somebody making a suggestion, but it was being assigned to somebody else in the team. And I was like, always remember this one. Anything is possible to the guy who doesn't have to do it.
Yes, exactly.
Should we take a break?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Doing great.
Okay, great. I almost started a podcast many times, and as would be almost the vast majority of podcasts right now, it would have just been a Zoom, podcast, or I'd be using StreamYard or one of these because it's easy to do, but it's just not this.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
totally different.
whenever I'd watch Joe Rogan, I rarely could watch the whole podcast. But often, as is the case today, Rogan has clips. There'd be like a particular subject that he'd get into and so forth. But every once in a while, a certain guest would be on. I'd see a clip with that guest. I'd be like, I need to see this whole podcast.
Yeah, same thing for me.
Because I don't know who has that kind of time where they're watching every single Joe Rogan podcast. But every once in a while, somebody is on and I'm like, I need to get the whole experience of this person, right? Now, before, if there was a clip of somebody and that person had made rounds in other Zoom-based podcasts, I never quite felt like I got the whole of them.
Right.
In the same way as something like this, that's like legitimately long form where you can just totally unpack.
Yeah.
And that's because I think it's the best human experience version. A real sit down, totally let it go. It's no clock.
Yeah.
If you want to spend, I can't tell you how many times I've been on a podcast where we allocated like an hour and it's, near the end of what we allocated. And then we're finally getting into something that's like really good. And you're already in that mindset of you're trying to like give answers that aren't too long, but, at the same time have the right amount of content. And I find myself subconsciously thinking about, well, can I get into that though? That'll probably stretch and get into a tangent and get off in this.
Right.
It's like, no, this is for tangents.
Yeah,
Go tangent grid.
Go whatever.
Hit every tangent that comes to your mind that you feel is worthy to hit. Let's chase that rabbit. Right. I love it. This is just one of my favorite experiences.
Yeah, it's so fun. I can't believe how much time had passed. It just seemed like it just went like that.
Yeah, it's virtually every single guest at the first point that we decide to take a little bathroom break, they do the same thing. They're like looking, oh my God, how did that amount of time pass? And it's just because this is a human experience.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but there's been several times where I've been on a Zoom call and I'm like, looking at the time because
I feel like that's every Zoom call for me.
Right.
When is this thing going to be over?
So where are you now? What do you see as the next chapter of your life?
That's a really good question. Yeah, something I actually think about every day, actually. So I think, as I've gotten a little bit older, I think that my priorities have changed a lot. I value my time a lot more than other things. I'm not as concerned about, accomplishments. I'm more concerned about my family, my daughter, being able to spend time with her, being able to go to events, being able to, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday, go on a 3-hour walk, which I do most days. Or, if it's nice out, be able to go paddle boarding. So it's just funny how my priorities have just, really changed. And then obviously, my health, just being able to have the time to work on my health is a huge priority for me. So that and my daughter are kind of top 2 priorities, but there's still very much this builder in me. And, I don't think that I could be happy without creating something.
That's the engineer.
That's the engineer. It's just like, I'm sure you know it too. When you get something working, and see people actually use it. And
there's no feeling like it.
Yeah, there's no feeling like that. And usually the process to get there is, a treacherous journey. Yeah.
All right, I'm telling you, this is one of my favorite things. So, I guess by the time this airs, we'll have launched it. Trying not to turn this into a commercial, but it's on this exact subject.
Yeah, it's not a commercial. We're talking shop about
exactly
releases.
But for real, we did a demo with Jenny Middich this morning on the feature I've been just dying to come out. So you probably know by now, this is a blood reseller service platform that we have, right? So we're matchmaking with LabCorp. You basically go there, you choose what blood work you want to have, you check out. But there are other services online. I'll mention them: Request a Test, Alta Labs, etc. Does basically the same thing we do, except that we came from Citizen Science. So in our checkout, there's a box you can check that says, do you want 10% off a Citizen Science discount? If you do, you'll get 10% off, but you agree to share your anonymized data.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you have to fill out a few more things for demographic information so that it's useful. It's not just blood work out of nowhere. But we keep, all identifying information out. So your name, your address, contact info, date of birth, all of that, right? But your age might be part of it, and the and everything else, right? As far as what you filled out in demo, that includes things like what diet you're on, whether your weight's stable or not, all of that. Okay.
Amazing.
But now the new feature we're rolling out is this experiment module. The way that works is you, as a designer of an experiment under Own Your Labs, can create a bundle of bundles. So for example, for Carnivore Month, with Jenny Middich in particular, she's going to run one of these. Day 1 is when you get your first bundle, which is 5 tests that she wants people to get. They get that test, and then there's 30 days later, another window of time for another bundle that you get, right? That data is collected by us and automatically reported based on what settings she gave it. So for example, it might take 10 people or 20 people or something like that. It's up to her. The windows of time as to when those happen. She could have 5 different bundles that fire off at different times, and they can have survey questions attached to them.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
So you can have, what's your weight at the beginning of this experiment? You've got that. And how's your sleep? It's like Google Forms. You can just design it within our system.
They could do a food frequency questionnaire if they wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can have it at those time points. We help facilitate that data collection, but we don't host instructions. That's for you. That's on your platform. We're not going to, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, for reasons.
We're not going to.
Yeah.
But as far as the implementation, we can help on that part of it for the capturing of the data, right? This is actually the first phase. Phase 2 is we want to partner with a private IRB for the real scientists who want to leverage our platform for actual experiments. I shouldn't say actual experiments because the others are experiments too, but for experiments that are going to be IRB approved, because how many scientists are like undergrads or just getting their feet in it, and they want to do things like pilot studies. They want to just get like 12 people to just do this thing, but they can't, like the funding, the amount of money you usually need, the barriers to entry for that are so high. But there's so much good citizen science on rapid iteration.
Yes, absolutely.
If you can just get things going, sometimes you're just trying to, look, I just want to find out if carnivores have high, TNF alpha, right?
Yeah.
And there's just not enough data that I've seen from anywhere. And you know what? It's going to be a pain in the butt for me to recruit a whole bunch of people and to have them go get the right blood work at the right place. I need for them to answer these questions at this certain time and so on. Well, now I could just write something in my Substack and go, here's a QR code. Takes you right into Own Your Labs.
Go register.
And then
get your labs.
Yeah. And then we handle that part. And if we're partnered with an IRB, you can then host instructions on our platform. At least that's the intent. We'll see if I get there. But that's because it's IRB approved. And therefore it's whatever the study design is that you got approved. We're just hosting the document. Yeah. Right. But regardless, I'm a firm believer that we need to keep this from being such a walled garden.
I could not agree more. That's actually, where's science? started. Like so many scientific discoveries came from people who didn't have educational background. I mean, that's one of the main reasons we have electricity, right?
Yeah.
Um, which is also going back to the mistakes in science. Um, that was kind of a mistake to discover electromagnetism. That was not the original intent of that experiment with Faraday. And yeah, Faraday was like totally outside the system, right? He just got um, really interested in this one scientist and just sent him letters until he agreed to hire him.
Right. uh, One of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin,
Yeah, Ben Franklin too.
well known
Yeah.
for coming up with a lot of. He had the bifocals. He had
Mhm.
and at that time they were called gentlemen scientists, as a way of saying not a formal scientist, right? Just
Mhm.
a person, usually a male of means,
Mhm.
who that was like their hobby. Their hobby was to do these experiments and then actually self-publish. Like, not, they didn't have a blog. They actually had to like write up pamphlets or literally whole books and then publish it themselves. But they could do that. And really the same thing as today. It was a calling that they were like, I want to meet this calling. I want to
Yeah.
find some way, even if it's just a small little bit of a contribution to this like larger body to help us all out, because we're all curious. We all want to know.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, you come from software, obviously, and it reminds me a lot of like open source. And it's amazing, for those who haven't been in software, there is software that people make. They make it, free. It does have a license, so it has restrictions, but it's amazing. Without open source, we would not have the tech companies that we have today.
100%.
I'm like,
And frankly, this is where I have a tough, getting back to the walled garden thing. We're awash in free data. We're awash in software. Like, if there's any proprietary software that has a high demand, you wait 5 minutes and there'll be an open source community that rallies behind another way of doing it, right?
yeah,
And that's standard.
yeah, people just expect it.
Yeah. But in the case of research, it's part of what my book's going to discuss, is that I feel like we've kind of cornered ourselves in many respects
Hmm.
with how research is done, that unfortunately I think needs to change structurally to better serve us, because there's a bit too much proprietary control
Yeah,
over
I
not just the
agree.
data, but even the reporting of the data.
That's one thing that's really surprised me is realizing that there are all of these public data sets out there with health data in them, and everybody's doing the same work to clean up the data sets before they can even use them. So when I found that out, I was like really surprised that nobody had made open source solutions for that.
I'm this will be considered very controversial, but I just believe it. I think if our taxpayer dollars are going towards data collection of any kind, like with some caveats that I won't go into, but I think that it's our data.
Couldn't
Like,
agree
we
more.
paid for it.
Yeah.
We that should be accessible. I really dislike that there's such a small group of people that control so much data that
Hmm.
affects us, right?
Yes.
Like, it'd be one thing if they collected it for themselves, for their own purposes, getting back to products and models
Hmm.
and things like that have to do with trade secrets. That's one thing. If it's something where you're, providing interventions related to medicine, and some amount of the data that was collected, or all of it, is funded by taxpayers, that's our data. It's not
It
just
is our
our money
data.
paid for that data.
That's right.
Right. And so it should be available for us to make use of,
Hmm.
because almost certainly there's going to be a lot more uses than what you're doing, because you're already leaving it contained, and it shouldn't be.
That's right. And maybe it's not all open, but something like FOIA, I think is like a great example where you know you can request communications and get it granted, or request certain government data and get it granted. it'd be really interesting to think about like a FOIA model. I mean, my preference would be to have it all open.
Yeah, I mean, I know what their caveats would be, so I'll just mention them real quick. Obviously, patient privacy is relevant, but I do also feel like it gets overextended to the degree that it becomes kind of an excuse to never share anything.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, and I know this from literally spearheading such a study myself, there is an expectation on the part of the people participating. You just set that in advance. You make clear what will be shared, what won't be shared, but that it will be if there's certain conditions, such as it being publicly funded. That should be an expectation by the people participating in the study. And that's the thing is, we also just need that for greater accountability. I'm concerned by how much the degree of control for those people have the one of the things I'm so proud of with our own study was that we got to release a raw data set on our imaging not too long after we had published.
That's amazing.
And I love that. It's all the major markers that we reported on. Now, I did have to obtain permission to do that because it's very unusual to release the raw data, even if anonymized. But my druthers is that we release everything, literally everything that we've collected.
I can agree more.
At the end. And I call upon all of the other studies to be doing the same thing. I'm so pro transparency. And it's where we're going to get not only just the best comparable research for others, but on top of that, it gets back to the accountability component.
Yeah, accountability. And when I'm in one role in my tech career, I was doing a lot of experiments. I think I ran over, and these are just like, A/B tests or different cohort experiments, but I think I ran over well over 1,000 in my time in that role. And one thing that I learned, if there's one thing that I learned from that, is there is gold in the sub-analyses. Subgroup analysis is, you can just find gold there. And it's really too bad that a lot of studies will just get released and you just see the medians, the standard deviations. You're seeing like the group stats, and
right.
You don't have the ability to say, can we subdivide this one? Can we put this, what happens if you put them in deciles? You just can't do it.
I've already talked about this multiple times here as well, which is that it's easy to speculate because there's plenty of backing behind it for multiple drugs. I'm not even going to call any particular ones out, for which if you could subdivide, granted, the argument pushback would be it's post hoc. Fair enough. But if you subdivide and there's a subset in your treatment population that it was worse for them, right? The outcome was worse for them. That's of public interest.
Yes, it is.
I definitely want to know about that.
Yeah.
Right? Now, again, we can still be intellectually honest and state, hey, it's post hoc, but that's still very, as a patient or as somebody who might be taking that medication, considering taking that medication, I would want to at least know about that. And it may not even be at all wrongdoing on the part of the researchers. They may just never have thought to look. But the ability to find that out shouldn't be limited by the lack of transparency, right?
No, it shouldn't.
I definitely,
and I also think post hoc is, somewhat of a weak argument too.
Right.
That's the whole point. You can't look at data until you have it. You can't analyze it until you have it.
And if anybody's going to argue against post hoc, then we need to talk about nutrition science.
Exactly.
Because then, okay, well, let's talk all on epidemiology. Look, but the bottom line is this, though. I think that a lot of science is suffering from this lack of transparency in the existing data that has been collected in mass. How do we get to this point where we've gotten so good at gathering data and not sharing it?
Yeah. It's wild, isn't it?
It is. It's so wild because it'd be different if we said, oh, it's okay though, because all of the different entities that are collecting this data, it's resulted in us having greater health as a population.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. That's not been the outcome, right?
No.
So, yeah, I want to know as much as can be reasonably shared. And right now, I think there's not enough that's being reasonably shared.
Mm-hmm. I will say one other learning, and this kind of goes to this argument for more sharing of data. One other learning that I had from doing all these experiments is how much we would initially get wrong in our analysis. That happened all the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because, we were making mistakes. Usually what it was is we would have additional questions. So we would get one answer and we'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. What happens if we look at this? And 7 steps later and we come to a finding. You're kind of like pulling on a little thread.
And it's hard to explain that to somebody who hasn't gone through this process, that a lot of getting to the right answer is figuring out the right question.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the data you're getting from an experiment is starting to get you to understand, oh, I've been coming at this the wrong way.
That's right. Yeah.
I need to be coming at it from this other way to get this other question answered. And some of the hardest questions to get to asking are the ones that are actually meaningfully testable.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times you're starting out with a question that you realize, oh, I can't actually answer this question. But because of the data I got back, I'm getting better at figuring out the one I can ask.
Yes.
And that's exciting and also kind of maddening at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of wish you could have gotten to it sooner, but a lot of times, no, I couldn't have known until I got there.
You couldn't have known. I mean, it's all part of the process.
Yeah. I've got a great one to share from our own study, which is I couldn't have known to the degree I know now what that noise floor is about.
Yeah.
Because if I had only had one quantitative analysis and at one time that's all we had, all I could do is go, oh, how much, what is the resolution of this scan? Well, I know through statistical analysis, we can kind of get a sense of what it is, but I don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
Not until I had another quantitative analysis. And then that actually helped better understand just really how noisy it should be at those levels. But then when I had a third, whoa.
Yeah. Now
that really helped. That's helped me for the next study, the study that we've been raising money for the Triad. Its code name is the Triad study. I know better how to formulate the question we're asking and how that methodology will be. And also getting back to the April 7th paper and everything that happened then, I have a better sense of what I can hold teams to earlier on and what can be allowable for adaptation and what can't. Right. But it's not a bad thing. And I speak from somebody who's experienced this. It's not a bad thing to be under enormous scrutiny for an experiment that's very meaningful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing at all.
No, it's not a bad thing.
All of them should allow for that level of scrutiny if they're going to have a big impact on people's lives.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of like a hallmark. If you look back in history, every kind of inflection point or different model was associated with sometimes a lot of scrutiny. I mean, people will get jailed. You think about Galileo is a really good example of that. Just coming up with the heliocentric model and how much he was critiqued for that. So if you just look back in history and take it forward, it might be a consequence of introducing a new paradigm. People are going to have difficulty breaking away from an old one.
One of my favorite, OGs is Barry Marshall with H. pylori.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
he's awesome.
He does the endoscopy. I hope I'm saying that right. He actually literally undergoes getting it checked, going down his throat, confirming that there's no ulcers, and then petri dish.
Yeah.
And he was thinking at the time might take a month to 2 months. Nope, took a few days. He develops an ulcer. But even then, oh my gosh, so much flack. And he was himself a scientist,
Yeah.
but so much flack. And it took 15 years for them to give him a Nobel Prize.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite stories.
It is. That talk about N of 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people dismiss it and forget that there have been Nobel Prizes around it.
Right. But I can appreciate how proving it to himself, even if it took a long time for ultimately other teams to replicate it and so forth, and still a paradigm to shift. Proving it to himself was the major component.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I needed for me with the lipid energy model. Is I did these N of 1 experiments that are lost to time now. They're back in 2017, 2018, 2019. That's why I probably did the most of the experiments. And I think I racked up over 150 blood tests.
Wow.
Yeah. Blood draws. And I'm not talking just, and I kind of miss those days because they were more pure science days, but
Just lots of rapid iteration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That exactly. It gets back to the value of doing something at a higher frequency. There's just things you can catch, if nothing else, to find out that there isn't anything you can catch.
Yeah.
But in my case, there was. Like I could say with confidence right now that you could write down a number between 75 and 350. And you could give me 7 days and I'll get my cholesterol levels in my bloodstream to within 30 milligrams per deciliter of that number.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. Now, how can I know that? Well, because I've already done it.
Yeah, 150 tests will tell you that.
Yeah,
150 draws.
I'd pull out my PTS diagnostics, and I would adjust how much I'm eating or not eating from what I talked about earlier in the podcast. I would eat less if I needed to get it up. I'd eat more if I needed to get it down. But I also could go further and start re-upping my glycogen stores if I need to get it really down, on top of increasing my insulin level. How do I know it has this much of a rapid change? Because I did it. Because I already did it before multiple times in various experiments. But if I had to do one study that I had to recruit a whole bunch of people for, that I had to wait until everything was put together and so forth, of course I'm not going to find this out as fast. The field of lipidology, that's what so many people I was talking to, that's how they were thinking of cholesterol. That's how a lot of doctors think of it today, that it's very glacial. It takes a long time for it to change.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's kind of a problem, right? Without understanding that aspect of it, that's how we end up with things like them changing the guidelines such that you don't have to be fasted for your blood test.
Gosh, I can't believe I didn't even know that change existed. That's wild.
Yeah, we still get some folks in at the Lean Mass Hyperresponder Facebook group. They're like, my triglycerides are through the roof. And fortunately, the group is smart enough that people immediately chime in and go, was it fasted?
Fasted or not fasted?
Right.
Gosh, that's crazy. Why was that changed?
There was a study that was released that suggested that it didn't have that much of an impact on clinical care. But if I'm being completely honest, I think that it ends up being one of those motivation things where it is a pain in the ass for the doctor to have to keep asking patients to do it. And this is where, and this is part of what I'm going to be talking about in the book a lot, is I worry how much motivated reasoning is at the levers of adjusting and modeling and so forth. Getting back to what you were talking about before with the product, when you were building your own models, you were trying to actually answer the question. But let's say I'm the executive who's your boss. I'm really pretty sure that if you do your models right, it's going to say we're a giant success.
Oh yeah. I mean, that would happen all the time.
But then all I'm doing is I'm just wanting to get a yes. It's no different than you being a yes person. I want a yes model.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I don't know how many times this actually happens, but do I think that there's a lot of modeling where people are wanting a certain answer and they're getting a certain, you know, they're building it to get that answer. Let's take the Mendelian randomization studies. If I get access and we build our own Mendelian randomization study that shows that, oh, LDL actually is beneficial. Higher you have it, the more beneficial it is. Will that get accepted? Probably won't.
not.
No,
Oh, you think it would?
no, I don't think it'd get accepted.
Okay, I don't think
That's what
so
I'm saying.
either.
Right. And what would they say? They would say, well, I need to scrutinize the adjustments that you made to build that model.
Yeah,
Right. Goes both
it
ways.
does.
How much is the motivation that I have when I start to build the model, even if unintentional on my part, is guiding how I build and make the lens to that data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, these days, it's easier than ever to build fairly complex models that may bake in that motivated reasoning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's a problem.
Yep. That's so true. Unfortunately, it's like the frustrating part is you kind of have to assume that a non-zero amount of that is happening.
Right. Can we say how much of that is happening? No. But
no.
I will say this. We do, as I've been doing for research recently, we do have a number of cases where there's just outright fraud.
Yeah.
And one unfortunate aspect to this is a common theme is it's only after somebody whistleblows.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just easily get picked up in routine regulation.
No.
Or routine enforcement, I guess you could say, of regulation. It's usually after somebody says something.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of dark to me
because
because
it is. Yeah, because it's not getting picked up in review, right?
yeah,
Most of the time.
How many times are things going under the radar?
Yeah. I mean, that question's kept me up at night more than once.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and wrap here? Oh, how can people find you?
Oh, I'm on X. Probably the best place to find me is on X at Greg Mushen.
And yeah, I mean, you're. I'll just say before we fully wrap, you are so active on X. You're very good at answering people's questions. You do a lot of threads, and I have to say, I'm really glad you were recommended. You were recommended by one of our mutual friends.
Oh yeah.
And so it was nice. I'm really glad you were able to come on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.